here, except Fred from the school board, Jeff's counterpart. So hopefully he joins in soon, but I'm seeing most of them have joined in and I believe they're connected. Okay, so that's wonderful. And I think we can start. Jeff, I see you're live streaming.
We're good to go now.
Okay, so from our end, we are good to go.
Okay, and again, as we usually attempt to be reasonably prompt, and again, to my clerk here, I believe that we're probably safe to get underway now. It's probably about a minute to 1 o'clock. And I also, there, Nina, just picking up on what you had said with the delegations that are here, with the exception of one person that's not on yet. I understand that there's a number of other people just on observation, I guess, as well, that's joining us. So I want to take this opportunity to welcome each one of those individuals that's in the audience via Zoom here this afternoon. So going to officially call this council meeting to order, 1 o'clock here on May 25th, 2020. And first of all, I'm going to ask for a moment of silent reflection, and then I would ask my colleagues that are able to stand and join with me in our national anthem. So this is now underway, so a moment of silent reflection. Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Are there any agenda announcements and/or amendments, Madam Clerk?
Thank you. Staff have received written submissions from Kim Bradshaw, Wendy Roberts, Amy Geiger, and Eleanor Hayward with respect to item 3 listed under items for consideration, notice of motion regarding second legal opinion on interim control bylaw, which have been circulated to members of council in advance of today's meeting.
Is that it, Madam Clerk? Okay, thank you very much. Has any member of council a disclosure at this point? I'm not seeing Councillor Tesser-Dirksen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Not really a pecuniary interest, but one of my children does attend Jean Vanier Secondary School. So I'm just wondering if that should be disclosed for the purposes of that particular item.
Well, if I might suggest, Councillor Tesser-Dirksen, the onus is on each one of us as individuals. You either have a disclosure or you don't. So the call is entirely yours.
I'm going to play it safe. I'm going to say I have a disclosure to make on that item.
I think it's very wise. Couldn't advise you better. So with that, Madam Clerk, if you would make sure that it's brought to my attention when we get to deal with that item, that Councillor Tesser-Dirksen has a disclosure on it. Is there any other member of council, any disclosures of any member of those items? Okay, now I'm going to read the resolution here, and I know that Councillor Hamid under consent item number 4 wants it pulled out, and I know Councillor Best under item number 9 wants it pulled out. So I have a resolution moved by Councillor Best and seconded by Councillor Ali, and be it resolved that consent items number 1 to 10 be approved. So, and again, with the mention of those four, is there any other member of council, any one of those items wish pulled out? And Councillor Challoner also has an item. Councillor Challoner, what item do you have?
It's item 4, Your Worship.
Item 4, that's been pulled out. Okay, any other member of council, any item that they wish pulled out and dealt with separately? Okay, number 4, Councillor Hamid, you are first, and then Councillor Challoner.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have a quick question. I mean, the report talked about some notices being sent in error, which result in duplication of taxes collected. Do we know how common is the situation? Do we know if it's happening other places that we might not have caught, or how do we catch that proactively?
Okay, I think Glenn, you might be the best one to respond to that, Glenn.
Sure, and through the mayor, it is very rare. It's very rare actually that we even bring the tax write-off reports in general. In this case, and the supplementary billing, it is triggered by the notices sent out by MPAC. So we're really the second level of that process. In this case, it was a differentiation between the builder than the unit owner themselves. We have done a review just based on the kind of conditions that allowed for this one to be sent out in the duplicate manner. We haven't identified any other examples, but to answer your main question, this is extremely rare that we would have to, this would occur and that we would have to take this step.
Okay,
Councillor Hamid.
That's all. Thank you.
Councillor Challoner on that same item.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just want to commend Glenn on the work that was done on this report. Certainly very supportive of the subtle changes he wants to make in terms of the fines for some activities. And typically, we're receiving this report probably once a year, I think. Is that correct?
At the most, we don't bring it every year.
Anything further, Councillor Challoner?
Sorry, Councillor Challoner, it's Nina here. You're just going to have to unmute, please.
Historically, Your Worship, and I realize it's been a while perhaps, I don't know when it stopped, but certainly during my first time around, we used to receive it once a year. Perhaps it was more common at that time in terms of write-offs, but it may be a consideration.
Glenn, on that point?
Yeah, it's a fair point. We definitely would bring it forward where it's warranted. I'm just thinking of the recent, 2 to 3 year window. I think, we probably have brought it in the last 3 years. I know there's been at least 1 year where we didn't have anything to bring forward for council. But typically, our intention would be if there are things to bring them all at once in one shot where it's warranted.
And again, John, you still have the floor, but I'm going to go to Andrew now, our CEO, if he's got any further input on that, because I think it's very critical as to, being reporting and getting the information that I think is going to be so critical, certainly at this point in time moving forward. So Andrew, on that point.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we're happy to bring it forward on a yearly basis if it's desirable.
Thanks, Your Worship. That's all I had.
Thank you. Has any other member of council anything further on item number 4? Being none, Councillor Best, you had number 9 taken out. Councillor Best.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Just regarding the Britannia secondary plan, I'm just going over the details. I support the proposal. Just a question to staff. In light of the emergency climate resolution that the council made last year, as well as the lessons learned from the COVID-19, are staff planning any changes in these reports to reflect the new realities?
Okay, now I'm not sure, Councillor Best, Ms. Koopmans, Glenn or Andrew might be able to respond to that. So Ms. Koopmans, Barb?
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Best, certainly through the secondary planning program, we will be we will be taking into consideration the climate change resolutions. Everything with COVID right now is quite fluid. We will have to take that into consideration as new directions come out. I'm not sure if that's with respect to community facilities or schools, but certainly as things continue to emerge and evolve, we will have to consider that as we proceed with the program.
That's
Councillor Bass?
great. Thank you, Worship and Barb. I just wanted to make sure that we learn from the challenges we have previously with, especially with provincial facilities, and make sure that we have our wish list updated with the province in terms of our needs, because as you can see from the next item, that we still need more high schools. That's all.
Is any member of council any further on item number 9? Again, Madam Clerk, I don't have any more speakers on any of the consent items. So members of council, you heard the resolution that 1 to 10 be approved. I'm going to assume that the majority of us are in favor of it, unless I see a hand go up in opposition. So that is carried. Okay, if everyone would just bear with me here for a moment there. Items for consideration. The very first one, we do have planning delegations, Fred Thibault and Jeff Kenny. Now, I'm just wondering, Barb, you might want to introduce this to start with. So, and we now are talking about staff report DS 010-20. And again, you'll find it on page 129 of our agenda. So, Ms. Koopmans, if you would introduce it, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is an application for actually 2 different temporary use bylaws. One relates to the Jean Vanier Secondary School site, and the purpose of the temporary use bylaw is to allow additional portables to be located on the site, occupying parking. That parking is the second part of the temporary use bylaw, where the displaced parking is proposed to be provided, at least in part, on 2 of the town's park sites. Natalie Stopar, who is our planner on this, is available to answer any questions, but there's also school board staff who will outline the application, the request, and the need for the portables, and any other information that council may desire at this time.
Okay, is there any clarification needed by any of my colleagues to Ms. Koopmans on this item? Okay, and again, getting to the delegations, Mr. Frederick Thibault from the school board.
Sorry, Mayor. Sorry, Mayor Neiman here. I think Councillor Di Lorenzo might have had a comment before we go.
I'm sorry, Councillor Di Lorenzo.
I have a question. Is it proper to ask the question now or wait for the delegation?
Do you want it now of staff or after the delegation? It's your choice.
It's a question for staff. I think we mentioned this before. I know we sent out flyers and information, but has the plaza on the northeast corner been directly contacted, and has that property owner been advised of how this may impact them?
Ms. Koopmans?
For you, Your Worship, the plaza owner has been notified as part of the overall application process. In part, the arrangement with respect to the additional parking on town sites is specifically to support the plaza owner so that there will not be overflow parking from the school site onto the plaza site.
I know the reason for the parking, but realistically, I'm thinking that some students may ignore that additional parking and maybe, or will very likely be parking in the plaza anyways. So I'm just wondering, has the plaza been aware of that high likelihood, and if they're going to enforce, or if they're going to ask the town for assistance, or what the plan is there? Because I just know in reality, it's not going to occur the way that we would like it to occur. And I know the reason why we legally need to have that additional parking, but keeping in mind parents and students, I just think people are going to be parking in that plaza regardless of what we say tonight.
Through you, your worship, we will certainly ensure that that is addressed with the plaza owner and the tenants during the process prior to bringing forward a technical report.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Di Lorenzo, anything further?
Not at this time. Thank you.
Councillor Ali, I believe you had a question.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would prefer the delegates speak first and the presentation happen first, and then I'll come back with my question. Thank you so much for asking, Your Worship.
Very good. Thank you. Is there any further clarification needed before we hear from the delegations? If not, we will proceed. And again, Mr. Thibault, hopefully we can bring you on. Nina, can you make that happen? Nina, make magic happen.
I am on it. So first of all, there's 2 speakers, so I will promote Fred first. Fred, you should be promoted over shortly. You're just going to have to turn on your video and your sound. And Jeff, you should be promoted as well. And you just have to turn on your video and your sound. You just give them a minute. Hi, Fred.
Afternoon.
Excellent. And hi, Jeff.
Looks as if we've got both of the delegations now up on screen. So Mr. Thibault, I have you first. So, and again, if you could just for the record, identify yourself for the council. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Through your worship, my name is Frederick Thibault. I am the Senior Manager of Planning Services at the Halton Catholic District School Board. Is everyone hearing me okay?
Yep.
Perfect.
At least I am anyway, so hopefully my colleagues can.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So I'm joined here today, as previously mentioned, by Jeff Kenny from Strategy 4, which is the individual that made the application on the board's behalf. And I'm also joined here today by our facilities and our traffic engineer, Ryan Merrick, which is the superintendent of facilities at the board, and William Marie, which is the traffic engineer for GHD that's done a lot of the studies with regards to this application, in the event there's any specific questions related to those matters at the end of the presentation. So with regards to today's presentation, I believe is it up or?
I'm just going to share it right now. Just 1 second.
Perfect. Thank you, Nina.
There you go. Is that okay?
Perfect.
It's up now. I'm seeing it now. So I'm going to assume that my colleagues can see it.
And Fred, if you just want to prompt me whenever you're ready to go through the slides, as well as Jeff, you're good to go.
Wonderful. So I'll just, I don't want to repeat a lot of what Barb had mentioned, but essentially the purpose of today's presentation is to provide you a little bit of an overview as to why the board really needs these temporary use bylaws. And really a lot of it is a requirement for us to accommodate our students in the town of Milton until such a time we can open our 3rd Catholic secondary school that's located just east near Kennedy Circle and Louis Saint Laurent on the southeast corner. So with that, I just want to move on to the next slide for the agenda for this presentation today.
Oh, sorry, just bear with me 1 second. There you go.
Perfect. The first thing we'd like to do is just provide a little bit of a background, especially as it relates to the accommodation pressures that we have on Jean Vanier as of now. Then we'll move into why we need the temporary use bylaw. At that point, I'll pass it over to Jeff, which will get into the specifics of the application and exactly what we're asking for. Afterwards, as I understand it, I'm sure there's a few questions about this. We'll be happy to take them. And maybe just one other thing of note is that if you'd like to learn more about what the board is doing, both with regards to this application, Milton number 3, the current school bound review that's taking place in the town of Milton for the secondary panel, we do have our school planning website there where you can subscribe to and get some updates on to what we're doing in terms of accommodation planning. Next slide. So what this slide is, I just want to orient you a little bit. What it's meant to do is show you a picture of what our accommodation pressures are at Jean Vanier. So here there's 4 notable years that we really want to focus on today. There's the current year, which is the 2019-2020 school year, which is coming to a close. And then leading up to that, we have the 2022 school year, which is when we hope and anticipate to open our 3rd Catholic secondary school. Do note, we still haven't received any funding announcements from the ministry on our latest submission for the capital portion of the Milton number 3 construction, but we are in a position to continue the site works at the site. And we're hoping to complete the site works by late summer, early fall, which would put us in a good position, hopefully if we get an announcement sooner rather than later, to get into that construction phase of things. So walking through the next 3 years then, for the next year, the September 2020-21 school year, what we anticipate to need based on our current enrollment projections is between 52 to 54 portables on site. And that we're hoping to accommodate that at Jean Vanier Catholic Secondary School. The next year after that, the 2021-2022 school year, and depending on when we open Milton 3, potentially the 2022-2023 school year, if we have to open mid-year, we're going to require well over 60 portables on site at Jean Vanier. So because of that, the board, and we'll get into this in a moment, initiated a secondary school boundary review that not only looks at the boundaries, but an interim solution on how we can accommodate our secondary school students until such a time Milton number 3 opens. So that's what we refer to as the interim accommodation option. And there's 2 types of options that we're looking at. Either we hold them at Jean Vanier until Milton 3 opens, or we try to find a holding school that can accommodate them until we open the facility. So really, that's all contingent on what the school boundary review committee decides on, if it's going to be at Jean Vanier or if it's going to be in the ultimate holding school location. And we'll get into that in a second. And depending on what that option is, will depend on how long we need the temporary use bylaw for. Is it for just the 2020-2021 school year, or will it be up until 2022-2023 when we open the facility? So with that, I'd like to move on to the next slide. Here are just a few other pieces of information with regards to enrollment, what's happening in the town of Milton. Maybe one thing I'd like to pull out of here is that Bishop Redding is currently, as you know, under construction for that 29 classroom addition. We hope to have that completed by September, especially the classroom component. There'll still be the gymnasium and the cafeteria to be built, but that should take a lot of the portables off of Bishop Redding. However, unfortunately, it's not enough to accommodate the JV population in overflow. So, we're really looking for that temporary solution for Jean Vanier. Next slide, please, Nina. So why we need a temporary zoning bylaw. So in 2019, we went through a minor variance application on site, which effectively reduced the overall parking that we needed from 4 parking spaces per classroom down to 2.6. This was based on a parking study that we had completed, plus a little bit of an additional buffer on top of that. So as of right, we're able to fit about 42 portables at Jean Vanier. So referring back to the previous slides, between next September coming up until when we open the school, we'll need a range between 52 to 60 portables on site. So because we can't accommodate those 2.6 spaces on site per classroom, that's why we're looking for the benefit of the temporary use bylaw to accommodate those additional spaces to reach that 2.6 ratio by using Town of Milton parking facilities at both Milton Community Sports Park off of Liederman Drive and Bristol Community Park to offset those parking requirements. So again, we need that temporary use bylaw for next year, as well as those 2 years leading up, the interim accommodation years, depending what we do for the school boundary review. Next slide, please. So I just want to provide a little bit of detail on the boundary review process. So right now we've initiated one back in November 2019. We established a committee and they've been looking at these interim options. So as I alluded to earlier, there's 2 types of options. One is to introduce a 6-period day at Jean Vanier, and I'll explain what that means in the next slide, which would effectively increase the capacity on site and how many students we can hold with the accommodations that we can have at the school. And the second type of option we're looking at is to establish the Milton number 3 school population as part of a holding school. So we would find another location that has space and then hold those students in the interim at that location until such a time Milton 3, the actual school, opens its doors. So if option A is what the boundary review committee and the board of trustees approves, then that would require the temporary use bylaw until such a time we open the new facility. Whereas if we do locate and decide to go with a holding school location, then we'll only need this temporary use bylaw for this upcoming year, the September 2021 or 2020-2021 school year. Again, if you want additional details on what's happening with that boundary review process, there is a link in the presentation that you can go directly to it. Next slide, please, Nina. So just, I don't want to go through too many of these details here, but this is what a 6-period day would look like. Essentially what it does is it splits the day into 2, and it staggers both of those schedules by 1 full period, which is about 75 minutes. So that does 2 things. First, it increases the overall capacity of the school, or how many students you can put in a school, by about 16.5%. And the other thing too is that it offsets the peak demand or peak drop-off times or pickup times morning and afternoon by making that offset. So that's something that we're considering right now as part of a committee. Again, it's not the official option. There's still the holding options that we're exploring, but this is how that would effectively work. So you'd be able to fit more students on site with less accommodation needs by doing that offset, and with the offsite parking as well. With that, next slide, please. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to Jeff Kenny to discuss the specifics of the application. So thank you all.
Mr. Kenny, welcome.
Hello, Your Worship and councillors. Thank you very much. And thank you, Fred, for the presentation. So also, this photo here that we'll start on is courtesy of Councillor Best. Thank you very much for that. It's descriptive in showing us what's out there right now. You see the seasonal dome there, as well as the 38 existing portables that Fred mentioned. The focus of my portion of this presentation will be really describing some of the nuts and bolts of the proposal with respect to parking numbers, location of portables, etc. So I guess with that said, if we could move on to the next slide. This is just the typical sort of hardline plan that one would see in a planning application or building permit application. In the lower right-hand side, you can see the existing 38 portables, and those portables which are shown not in gray, the ones that are shown in white. Those are the 60 portables, or the additional 22, I guess, up to 60 that we're talking about. Now, I wanted to just highlight with respect to the plan that in the lead up to this application, we did consult with Town of Milton staff, specifically from planning as well as the Parks and Recreation Department. As you may be aware, there is a joint use agreement on site for the seasonal dome. And therefore, the parking lot directly in front of the field house, as well as that on the eastern side of the site, the right-hand side of the plan, those lots will remain free and clear for after-hours parking related to the dome at the request of town staff. So next slide, please. This slide just captures some of the critical, I guess, statistics about this plan. So I'll go through them quickly, and if there's questions, we can address those after. So currently within the school itself, there are 69 core classrooms. As we mentioned, there's 38 portables on site, and an additional 22 to be added up to the 2022-23 school year, as Fred noted. There are 129 total classrooms, therefore, total, under our most restrictive 60-unit portable situation. The site currently provides for 312 parking spaces. So of these spaces, 238 will remain usable under that most restrictive 60 portable scenario. Staff, as well as accessible and visitor parking, as well as the aforementioned town agreement, are prioritized through the plan. Fred has mentioned it, but I'll reiterate, the zoning bylaw requires 4 spaces per classroom. And as Fred alluded to, in 2019, we did pursue a minor variance to reduce the per classroom parking ratio, and we're successful with your approval, councillors, to adjust the parking ratio down to 2.6. We're not depending on that or using this ratio as a justification, but rather a sound benchmark that arises out of technical study on which to base this application. So just to reinforce that, our actual studies demonstrated that Jean Vanier requires about 2.26 spaces per classroom functional rate of use. And then in working with town staff, there was a buffer that was added to the actual bylaw mandated, sorry, the variance mandated number of 2.6. Next slide, if you could. So considering that total 129 classroom load, 69 core and up to 60 portables with 238 spaces available on site, if we were to look at this on just the site specific basis, we would see 1.84 spaces per classroom. So, you know, recognizing the need that past studies have demonstrated the need for more, the board has gone out and reached an agreement in principle with town staff for the combined use of the Milton Community Sports Park Liederman Drive lot, as well as the Bristol Community Park, to a combined total of 98 spaces. Now, the combined total of the on-site and off-site locations would be 336 spaces, divided by 129 would meet the targeted and studied 2.6 spaces per classroom. We could have the next slide, please. So a little bit more on the agreement. The off-site facilities are proposed to be used from September to June, Monday to Friday, during the following hours. And you can see 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. for the 2020-2021 school year, and for the 21 to 23 school years, 7 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. Now, that would be to accommodate a potential 6-day period schedule, as Fred noted. The board would also be providing maintenance to those locations in exchange for the use of them, and that would come in the form of snow clearing. The board will also be responsible for providing a shuttle service between those offsite locations and the Jean Vanier site, with multiple runs anticipated throughout the day. Could move to the next slide. So on the traffic side, obviously increasing the per classroom, the number of classrooms on site with a request to drive the ratio down, there's a need to offset those impacts. And they come in the form of the addition of bike racks to the site. Once again, the board will endeavor to install an additional complement of racks to encourage cycling. Presently on site, there are 152 bicycle spaces. 48 more will be added to bring the total to 200. The board has also been encouraging over the last 2 years the provision of carpooling site, especially for students. And the number of dedicated carpool spaces will be increased by 50% from 5 up to 10. The board also encourages walking in its messaging, day-to-day messaging of students and parents. There's also going to be a parking pass system implemented and designated parking areas for staff and visitors. And perhaps that may tie into Councillor Di Lorenzo's comments with respect to potential offsite impacts. You have the next slide simply shows details of the proposed shuttle service. There you can see the that's, I guess, the Liederman lot offsite location, and a little bit more information on the trips. So we're looking at 4 morning and 4 afternoon trips, and then you have the inbound and outbound route from Liederman. We're just showing one of the locations here, the closer of the two. And so in theory, a total of 280 passengers per hour could be transported. And the last and final slide, if we could. Oh, just back one. There we go. So in summary, all of the permits and approvals for preparation of the 3rd secondary school site have been now obtained. The site has been serviced. The necessary watercourse relocation has been completed, and filling is now underway with an expected completion of later this year. Point number 2 addresses the expected completion of the 3rd secondary school, which Fred has described. We've gone over the board's interim accommodation boundary review right now and the options which arise from it. And really, I think COVID-19 has told us that, you know, we need to protect for all eventualities. So with that in mind, the board is seeking the longest possible temporary use period of 3 years. However, the board is also attempting to demonstrate that it is doing everything possible to potentially not require that length of time through the interim accommodation review. That said, the current times have showed us that we can never be too careful, I think, in protecting for the most restrictive scenario. And so I think that concludes our presentation. Board and its consultants are here to answer your questions, should you have any. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And again, I do have a starting of a speakers list, but just before I get on to that, I know on the information that I have, Mr. Merrick was listed as a delegation. I might have missed that in the introduction. Is Mr. Merrick to present Mr. Thibault?
Mr. Merrick is here. If need be, we can bring him in if there's any facility related questions that I can't answer. Okay, very good. Okay, unless there's any questions pertinent to him, then he doesn't wish to make a presentation at this time. I just don't want to overlook him. That's all. Okay, very good. Councillor Ali and Councillor Di Lorenzo, in that order, they have questions and or comments. Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a few questions for the presenters. I know that you have listed everything out and the reasoning. You've given all of those points in a good manner. I appreciate that. I want to know if you can list out the alternatives that are being looked at by the board instead of JV, instead of this school. What are the other options available?
Mr. Thibault.
Through your worship and to you, Councillor. The other alternatives, I guess we can split them up into two parts. The other alternatives for the upcoming school year, the 2020-2021 school year, we don't necessarily have any that are in the town of Milton. As I mentioned earlier, with Bishop Redding already being substantially full even after the addition, we don't have anything here that would be ready for September. So if it were the case where we were not successful in this endeavor, we'd be having to explore locating something in either Burlington or Oakville and using one of our own facilities for the school year. And because the vast majority of our facilities are already full, we'd be looking at having to house these students in additional portable accommodations within those municipalities. And again, Jeff kind of pointed this out too, like with regards to portable availabilities too, it may become difficult how we spread those out too. So we have to be cognizant of that and whether or not they will be available to ship a sizable amount, I would say, to either a Burlington or Oakville school. So realistically for next year, this is probably the best, least disruptive alternative. The other thing we want to consider as well is because we're having all these potential moves coming along the way, we're really trying to minimize the amount of times students that are meant to attend Jean Vanier, the number of times they have to move from one location to the next. So we're trying to reduce that disruption to these students the best we can. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. It does. Oh, sorry, Your Worship.
Yep. No, go ahead.
Thank you. It does. I just want to know if that happens, though, will those kids be bused? Will Milton kids be bused to Burlington and Oakville?
Through your worship, yes, they would. We would be providing transportation to these students to this this other location.
Thank you. I have another question. Has the school board looked at talking to the property owner of the property located at the southwest corner of Louis Saint Laurent and Bronte? I understand it's owned by Fieldgate. I could be wrong.
Through your worship, we've had conversations in the past. Unfortunately, they didn't work out. That was one of our first options we were looking at, and I guess the timing of what they're looking to do versus the timing of what we require leading up to the opening of the new facility didn't necessarily align. So it wasn't an option that we could pursue, unfortunately.
Thank you. It is very unfortunate because that would have been an ideal solution, so to speak. Now, you talk about shuttling kids from two of the Milton parks, and I just want to make a little correction. I know you keep mentioning Leaderman Drive. I wish you wouldn't say that because it created quite a bit of confusion locally for especially my ward, because even in the notices you put out, Leaderman Park was mentioned, and it ended up being a huge kerfuffle about nothing because I got emails and calls. People were saying that we are going to raise Liederman Park and turn it into a parking lot. So just a little point of notice here, just in future, make sure you have the right terminology on your signs, because a lot of damage had to be corrected because of that. And so that actually answers all my questions. Thank you.
Well, Councillor Ali, thank you very much for that. And again, I got some feedback on that as well. So I'm sure that Mr. Thibault and Mr. Kenny have heard your thoughts in that regard. So it'll be corrected. So Councillor Ali, any further?
Thank you, Your Worship. This is all I have for the presenters. I have other questions for staff later.
Thank you. Councillor Di Lorenzo?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had a question for the presenters. The presentation mentioned that the application has already been submitted 4 times to the province for the school number 3, and one of the times was as an emergency request. So it's been submitted 4 times and been declined each time. When the application got resubmitted, is it resubmitted differently based on the province giving reasons why the application keeps on getting declined? Or is it the same application resubmitted each time? I'm just trying to find some more clarification of what's been the reasoning for the decline each time it gets submitted. And I know it was once submitted as an emergency business case as well, and also declined.
That's a fair question, and through your worship, what I would say is that every time we submit, we certainly review the entirety of the business case that we're providing to the ministry. I would say that it gets thicker and thicker as time progresses, and we make sure that every time we're trying to address every possible iteration, as well as providing as much warning as to what may happen if we don't reach that tentative opening date. So you may have seen in the presentation, initially when we first submitted this business case, what was it? I think it was back in 2014. The initial opening year for this was supposed to be for 2019-2020 school year. And leading up to this point, every time that we've submitted and the response we received is that it's not necessarily an urgency at this time, is the main rationale that was provided to us. Acknowledging that the ministry does have a very limited funding pool for capital priorities provincially. They have to spread it around between all the 72 boards across the province, and there's not ever enough capital to fund all the projects. I guess in the ministry's eyes at that particular time, they didn't see our project as being something that they should fund right away. Maybe there were others that trumped it. And then, yes, we submitted an emergency business case because the capital priorities process was delayed, given the, I guess, the change in governance. So we just wanted to, again, reassert and say, we really need this funding because we're reaching a point where if we're further delayed, we're kind of in the present situation now, living it, that we'd have significant accommodation concerns. So we continue to raise that, and we're very hopeful that this time around, it's very telling, very similar to Councillor Best's aerial imagery, when you show a ministry that, yes, the students are here, they're on site, here are the portables. I think this time it was made a lot more loud and clear. So we're very hopeful, and we hope to get an announcement sooner rather than later on this.
Councillor Di Lorenzo?
Thank you. My additional question is, the presentation mentioned, in the 21-22 year, that you're looking at the interim accommodation for that 1 year, because then there will be no more space or even more portables at Jean Vanier. But then that in 2022 to 23, you anticipate the school finally being built. Is that based on any reply from the province on when they think it's going to be priority? Or is that just that the Catholic board's hoping that, by then the province is going to approve one of the applications and the school will be built? I'm just wondering, is it 2022-23 hopeful, wishful thinking, or there are some assurances that it will be funded, built, in place by that 2022-23 school year?
Through your worship, it's based on, I would say, our hope that we are going to be successful in the next round. We've been anticipating an announcement in, I guess, the spring of this year. But again, with, I think, the COVID and that taking priority over any kind of capital announcements. We believe that it may have been delayed. So what we've done is look to how long it would take us to construct a secondary school facility, which is between 18 to 24 months. And we've kind of pushed that forward to see what the anticipated date is. So I would say that if we are able to start construction on the school site for the actual facility itself, not site preparation, I just want to be clear on that, by the fall, I think we'll be in line to open by the 2022-2023 school year. And if construction goes to plan, hopefully it'll be by September. If we're not receiving any kind of responses from the ministry by that point, or we're not in the ground by that point for whatever reason, then we may be seeing even further delays. So a lot of this timing is going to be based on what the ministry comes up with in an announcement, and hopefully it's sooner rather than later. I don't have any additional details I can provide on that because I just don't have them. So it's hope. We're just hoping.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So if the hope doesn't occur, is the interim option then just going to be extended for additional years? Is that the plan?
Through your worship, the way that we've planned it is the worst case scenario, where the interim option that we've looked at is going to be able to accommodate student projections for the entirety of the 2021-2022 school year, as well as the entirety of the 2022-2023 school year. So that gives us a 2-year buffer, so that, worst case scenario, we'll be opening in September 2023 if things don't align, especially on the funding standpoint. Beyond that point, like we're in a completely different ball game there. With that's when we're going to have to start looking at.
Okay. I only have 2 more questions, I promise. First question is the busing to the offsite parking. It's happening in the morning and in the afternoon, I assume close to when school's starting and ending. What happens in the middle of the day if a student becomes sick and someone needs to drive there to do a pickup or drop off or park or go in the office? Is there going to be some type of parking during the day or busing during the middle of the day? Or are parents or students going to be using the residential streets around the school to park? Like, I know this busing is during the morning and afternoon, but what happens in situations where someone needs to get to the school and it's not early morning or afternoon? Where would they park?
So through your worship, I believe for that situation, what more than likely will happen, because that a lot of times when we're providing busing, it's probably going to be from one of our busing consortium contractors. During that midday period, we'll make sure that they're available at that time, so that they can be on call. And if there is an emergency situation where a student that has parked on an offsite facility requires access to their car immediately, then we'll be able to provide it. And I'm sure if the emergency is even more urgent, our school administrations are often very capable to addressing those situations, whether it's a cab or whether it's them driving the student themselves, depending on the situation, of course. And again, we think that the vast majority of the students that will be parking offsite will be our elder cohorts, like the grade 12B senior years. So we hope that there will be fewer, but that's what we would provide, is like the main shuttle service is on the 2 ends. And if there's an emergency, we'll be certainly available to accommodate that student in particular.
Councillor Di Lorenzo.
Thank you. And my last question was, have you been reaching out? I think the answer is yes. Have you been reaching out to our local MPP? Because ultimately we're waiting for a provincial answer. And has their office been helpful or supporting and giving you any answers on what the delay is, or any information on how to help with the application process?
Through your workshop, I can answer the first half of that question. The later half, I don't have the information, but what I can say, I do know our trustees are in communication with the PARM. They are very vocal in letting them know that this is an issue, and that it needs to be resolved as soon as possible. So they are in communication.
Thank you for your time in the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just before I move on with Councillor Hamid and Councillor Best, I think Councillor Di Lorenzo, you still have the floor, but I think it's relative to one of the questions that you had with regards to temporary use bylaw. It seems to me, and Ms. Koopmans can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think the public should be aware The temporary just means that, and it seems to me the max is 3 years. And again, I'm well aware of what's being advocated in the long run, 2022 to 2023. This, of course, this council is in place until 2022 of that fall, but it very well could be a new council that might have to deal with this if it had to be extended. So I think there needs to be a little clarity on that. So Ms. Koopmans, maybe if you could help just on that timing.
Through you, Your Worship, the Planning Act allows for temporary use bylaw to be approved for a period of 3 years. Upon application, prior to the lapsing of that bylaw, council can, through the similar process, extend that bylaw for another period. But there is a definite timeline attached to the bylaw.
Councillor Di Lorenzo, you had the floor. Any further?
No, I'm good. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I
Appreciate
think
it.
that just needed a little bit of clarity. And of course, guess just to offer a little bit of levity to temporary. I'm well aware, and I said this on more than one occasion, when they introduced income tax back in 1917, it was to be temporary as well. Here we are, what, 103 years later, it's still temporary, but it's here. So keeping that in mind, what temporary might interpret into. Councillor Hamid and Councillor Best.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. All my questions have been asked. Since I have the floor, I do want to clarify one thing, and maybe my understanding is incorrect. It was mentioned that we hope that the approval will come soon, but it was also mentioned that the 3-year time frame is a worst case scenario, and I can't reconcile the two. The worst case scenario, technically speaking, is that we won't have the new site by 2023, and then we'll have to revisit this issue in 2023 to figure out what to do next. I just don't want members of the public who might be watching, or as a story come out, I don't want people to be misunderstanding the real issue. So that is technically correct, right? Like the worst case scenario is that we won't have a site by 2023, and we'll have to figure out what to do next after the 3-year expires.
Mr. Thibault, and I think Councillor Hamid, your observations is pretty accurate. Mr. Thibault, on Councillor Hamid's, I guess, questions and or comments and or observations.
Your worship, I would agree with that, yes.
Councillor Hamid.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to clarify that because I don't want anyone to misunderstand that the worst possible case scenario is the 3 years. Hopefully that is, hopefully it's going to take less than that. And hopefully the province will come through. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And I think the operative word in this is hope. Councillor Best, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. And just one question to the delegation, because I've already sent a list of questions to staff for everyone to work through. Regards to the temporary situation, I agree with Councillor Hamid, maybe in 3 years, could be longer. Was there any attempt to look at using all or part of the former EC Jury High School area, which is already set up as a high school, that even if you just put portables there, you have a core school there, which could be shared with the Halton District School Board in terms of the technical wing, the cafeteria, the gyms and things like that. Is that something that could be an option if we have to go longer? Because there is space there. It sits on 60 acres and it sure isn't being used to capacity.
Mr. Thibault,
Through your worship, a very good question, and you might be happy to hear that it is one of our temporary accommodation options that we are looking at for the 2021 school year and beyond. We have been in communication with IO as well as the provincial school to let them know that this is something that we may be interested in pursuing. So if we were to, it will more than likely not be available for next year, given a little bit of the uncertainty on COVID and what the whole social distancing aspects will be. And a lot of people just don't know what's going to happen, so they don't want to commit to something like that. But you know, if we were to explore that and we were able to reach an agreement with them for the 2021 school year, it is one of the holding school options that we are exploring at this time. And then in that way, the temporary use bylaw would only be required for next year in the setup period between that year leading up to the 2021-2022 school year. We could be at EC Drury. They do have some underutilized facilities that we could establish there and supplement that with additional portables as well. So these are some of the preliminary conversations we've had with them at this point. And we're hoping that that may be something that we can pursue. Again, I just want to remind that this is part of the school bound review process, where we do have a committee established, which is comprised of members of the community, school council chairs or delegates from those school council chairs from all the elementary and secondary schools. And this is one of the things that they're reviewing right now. And hopefully they will bring forward a recommendation to our board of trustees for their ultimate approval on what that interim option could be. So I'm not sure, we don't know yet what the committee will come up with. They're still reviewing those multiple options between the 6-day period or holding. So once we get a little bit more clarity on that, we'll get even more clarity on what the term of that temporary use bylaw is going to need to be. I hope that helps.
Councillor Best.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll have some comments later.
Okay, very good. That was the speakers list that I have. And again, I know Councillor Ali and as well Councillor Best have some comments after I read the resolution, and again before or after I take the vote on that. Keeping in mind, and I'm going to read the resolution here, keeping in mind that Councillor Tesser-Dirksen has the disclosure on that. So I will work on an assumption that the majority of us are in favor of this, unless I see a hand or two go up. But keep in mind that Councillor Tesser-Dirksen has abstained from questioning, and of course will abstain and be recorded that she did not participate in the vote of this as well. So with that being done, I think Madam Clerk, I think we've got that reasonably well under control. So I have a resolution moved by Councillor Best and seconded by Councillor Ali, and be it resolved that Development Service Report DS-010-20 be received for information. Is there any questions with regards to this motion? Okay, if not, yeah, Councillor Ali, before I take the vote, do you wish to speak on this now, before
Yes,
I take the vote? Yes,
Your Worship.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have actually a few directions for staff, if that's okay. My big concern with allowing the parking with these portables is the overflow parking. Even though we are having additional parking provided at our parks, I feel like we need to really consider overflow parking in all the local streets wrapped around JB. So for example, we have McEachern Court, we have Clifford Point, Locker Place, and Ledger Way. These streets already have a lot of traffic issues, and it's not a secret for anybody that Ward 4 continues to be the ward with most traffic complaints coming out of. So my direction to staff would be that when they do prepare the technical report, consider this, and if they can also come back with mitigative efforts or measures that can be taken to take the pressure off of the local side streets that I just mentioned. That is one direction. And also I see on the page 2 of this report that there will be separate temporary use bylaw applications for use of both the parks. And I want to know if those will be followed by technical reports, will also include traffic impact studies in the areas where the parks are. So for example, the park that is in Ward 4, will the technical report include a traffic study that is telling us what the traffic impacts will be because of the added busing and the shuttling?
Okay, yeah, very good. And again, there's comments there now, and I know there's staff direction there, and I'm sure the staff has definitely made a note of that, but there's a question there included as well, Councillor, as well. So Ms. Koopmans, if you could address the second part of Councillor Ali's questioning.
Through you, Your Worship, my understanding is that the traffic demand management, as was put forward in the presentation, will consider the impact of parking not only on the Vanier site and surrounding area, but also on those parks in the surrounding neighborhoods.
Thank you. Thank you. Through you, Your Worship, that answers my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Keeping in mind with the staff direction, it'll have no impact on this motion that's before us right now because it's really being received for information. But I think it's wise, if anybody's got any suggestions like Councillor Ali just had, the staff be aware of some of our thoughts in that process. So Councillor Ali, anything further?
Thank you, Your Worship. That is all. I just hope, like you said before, the keyword is hope. I hope the province is watching and then they do the right thing and they download the funds that are needed to be downloaded so we can get on with the business of, getting our kids educated right here in the town of Milton.
Thank you very much, Councillor Best, and then Councillor Di Lorenzo. Councillor Best.
Yes, thanks, Your Worship. Similar comments to Councillor Ali, just to the board representatives. If you do need any additional assistance from the region or the town, I believe between Chair Carr and yourself, Your Worship, we could certainly put some pressure on the provincial ministers, because it's not just the education ministry, it's also infrastructure and treasury. So between the three of us, hopefully we can get some pressure, because also the Halton District School Board is under the same situation.
Thank you very much. Councillor Best, any further?
No, that's all.
Thank you. Councillor Di Lorenzo?
I just had some comments. We're talking about, if the council is all in favor of this. I don't think council is actually in favor of it. It's just that the alternatives are much worse. It does seem to be an emergency situation right now. And if we did not change to allow the additional portables and allow, the exceptions for the parking, the alternative would be busing students to Oakville and Burlington. So, am I in favor of the solution that's currently presented to us? No, but the alternative is worse. I mean, having students go in Milton being bused outside of Milton to surrounding municipalities. So I just want to make sure the public's aware of that, what the alternatives would have been if we did not approve this, because I think in the new school year in 2020 in September, when students and parents realizing the situation and that they can't, go to the school directly, they have to go off-site parking and get a bus to go to the school. If they need to park by the school, they're going to ask, how did we get to this point? How could council approve this? How could we do this? So my comment is that, if council did not approve these changes with portables or parking, the alternatives are worse. I think that's why council is going to vote in favor for these changes. That's comments.
Thank you. And again, before I get to Councillor Ali for the second time, just one thing I want to be very clear, and again, Councillor Di Lorenzo, we're not approving anything at this time, just receiving it for information. So I think that's going to be important. But I believe, Ms. Koopmans, I stand corrected on this, but I think it'll be back before council probably in the next, 6 weeks, 2 months, that time frame. That's when the approval process will happen. Ms. Koopmans?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Your Worship, you're correct in that this is just an information report. Given the current COVID situation, we are working out the technology and logistics of holding a statutory public meeting pursuant to the Planning Act, but we did want this to be out in the public forum with complete information so that people have a good opportunity to understand what's being requested and to ask questions. We do intend, as soon as we can get our technology and ducks in a row, to bring this forward to a statutory public meeting and then a technical report to the board, trying to align our timeframes and give them the most flexibility as we're both trying to respond to the situation and how accommodation may change.
Councillor Di Lorenzo, you had the floor. Any further?
No, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the clarification that there will be a future vote
Yes.
On the bylaw changes that we're discussing today for information for the parking and for the portables. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Ali?
Thank you, Your Worship. You answered my question by clarifying it. I just wanted to point it out to Councillor Di Lorenzo that this is just for information and that there is no vote happening today. And I appreciate staff actually being in front of the 8 ball and providing the public an opportunity to come out and speak if they wanted to, and giving all the information in this report. So I want to thank staff for that and all the detailed email replies that they give me in helping with this issue that pertains to Ward 4 of Milton. Thank you.
Thank you. I do not have any further speakers. You heard me read the resolution before. You also heard me make mention earlier on that Councillor Tesser Dirksen has a disclosure and the conflict on this. She is excluded from this, and it's been recorded as such. So I'm going to work on the premise that the biggest majority of us is in favor of this resolution, receiving it for information, unless I see a hand go up. And I'm not seeing a hand go up, so this is carried. Members of council, thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to read the resolution, and then once again, I'm going to get the clerk to just highlight the process on going through this one. I have a resolution moved by Councillor Tesser Dirksen, second by Councillor Besson. Be it resolved. Whereas procedure bylaw 007/2019 provides that notice of motion shall not be discussed or debated upon introduction, but shall be included on the next regular council meeting agenda for consideration. And whereas section 7.9.3 of the Town of Milton Procedure Bylaw 007/2019 as amended permits a notice of motion to be considered upon its introduction by an affirmative vote of 2/3 of the members present. And whereas it is deemed impractical or not in the best interest of the Town of Milton to delay consideration. Therefore, be it resolved that the pertinent rules contained in section 7.9 of Procedure Bylaw 007/2019 be waived to permit the introduction and consideration by council of the notice of motion of council agenda pertaining to obtaining a second legal opinion on the efficiency and risk of pursuing an interim control bylaw. Madam Clerk, if you would again just highlight the process from here on in.
Thank you, Your Worship. So just a couple of points of clarification on our procedure bylaw requirements. So item 2 in items for consideration is a procedural motion. The nature of a notice of motion is for a councillor to give notice that they have an item for council's consideration at a future meeting. Item number 2 is a motion to waive the rules of procedure to allow council to discuss and debate item 3 under items for consideration at today's meeting and not at a future meeting. This procedural motion to waive the rules of procedure requires a two-thirds vote of council, which is 6 out of 9 members. If council approves item 2, then council can debate and vote on item number 3 today. There are also 2 delegations waiting to speak on item number 3. They would not be able to speak at today's meeting until council approves item number 2. If council does not approve item number 2, then item 3 is introduced with no discussion and debate at today's meeting. It will be placed on the June 22nd, 2020 council meeting agenda, and the delegations would be able to speak on the topic at that time.
Is there any question of clarification on the process as we move forward? And again, keeping in mind that we will need 2/3 to proceed. And again, I'm going to be working on a presumption, unless I see a few hands go up otherwise, that the biggest majority of us are in favor of this motion moving forward. Are there any dissenters? And again, if I see a hand go up, then I'm not seeing any, Madam Clerk, unless you can observe something that I don't. So then this motion is carried, so we will be proceeding. Now, Madam Clerk, and I stand corrected on this, and I know there's 2 listed delegations, but I think it's sometimes very appropriate if the mover and the seconder want to make any introductory remarks on this before I go to the presenters on this. So, Councillor Tesser Dirksen, you're the mover of it. Councillor Best, the seconder. So, introducing this motion, Councillor Tesser Dirksen.
Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to my colleagues on council. Typically, I don't like asking for a waiver of notice. I know why we have it. This particular matter, though, we are working within maybe a more sensitive time frame than normal. Certainly, we're aware that there are some elements we won't be discussing because they might be confidential. So I'm really going to keep my talking to a minimum, but I think we all understand the background here. What we're looking for is just a fulsome body of information from which council can have the benefit of making a decision. If we are, in fact, called upon in the near future to make a decision to debate and vote on an ICBL, interim controlled bylaw, I think it's important that we have all of the information at our disposal. I think it might be beneficial to actually have the delegates, unless Councillor Best wants to add some comments through you, your worship, perhaps have the delegates say their pieces, and then I will have some further comments after that.
Fair enough. Councillor Best, anything to add?
I agree, and I'm looking forward to the delegations and discussions. I'll have some comments later.
Okay, thank you very much. And again, moving forward, and again, they're going to be directed by the clerk here as well. Now, I know Mr. David Donnelly, solicitor for the group, he's registered, and I'm going to be going to him first. Now, I think what I'm looking for as well, just so Kim Bradshaw, so that person can get ready on the assumption that the majority council wants to hear from that person. So this is a process that I want to make sure. So it'll just a simple majority of us because that person missed the deadline. I know I'm certainly in support of hearing from that individual, and I'm going to assume that the biggest majority of us will hear from that individual as well, unless I see a hand up. I don't. So then Kim Bradshaw will be second delegation to speak to council on this item. So that person can get ready after Mr. Donnelly has had his presentation. Again, Nina, if you could get Mr. Donnelly on there, we're good to go.
Mr. Donnelly, I'm just going to promote you over so that you can join us on the main screen. If you could just turn on your video and audio when you join over. Mr. Donnelly, I see says that you are speaking, but we do not hear. I'm hoping you can turn on the sound.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, Mr. Donnelly, you're coming across loud and clear here. It's Gord Krantz. Oh, we just lost you there. Oh, there we are, back again. If you just do a little test for us.
Good afternoon, Your Worship and Council. My name is David Donnelly.
Very good. Welcome.
Thank you, Your Worship. I appreciate the opportunity to delegate before Council, particularly under these trying circumstances. The purpose of my presentation here today is to represent Action Milton, a very active group of residents who are concerned about their environment, in particular their water and air quality. The primary submission I have to make today is to express on behalf of our client the strong support for the motion brought by Councillor Tesser-Dirksen, seconded by Councillor Best. It is in the best interests of Action Milton and in fact the whole community to seek a second opinion with respect to the need for an ICBL dealing with a number of important matters that I'll be raising later in my presentation. Now, first and foremost, as part of that second opinion, it's imperative in my client's opinion that any material that be sent to external legal counsel include the planning opinion of Mr. Alan Ramsey, who is a very experienced land use planner, who has provided his own opinion own independent planning opinion to Action Milton regarding the need for an ICBL. It's almost impossible in my respectful submission to create a positive or supportive legal opinion if the planning justification for the ICBL isn't made out. In other words, as a lawyer, I can't recommend something under the Planning Act unless I have a positive application or recommendation from a planner. So I think it's easy through the process of deduction. also by Mr. Ramsey's discussion with town planning staff that it seems that there is a disagreement in terms of the viability or the advisability of an ICBL. So it's my first primary submission on this point that anything that goes over to external counsel must include the planning opinion of Mr. Ramsey in order for that second opinion to be viable in my respectful submission. Second, this request or this motion could just as easily be styled as a request for a fourth legal opinion. Our firm provided an opinion on February 24th to mayor and council. And in addition, a very senior municipal lawyer named Peter Gross from the national firm of Gowlings has also provided on May 6th a legal opinion to mayor and council that strongly recommends in favor of an ICBL to deal with air quality and future aggregate extraction in Milton. It's also my client's submission that any material that be forwarded to external legal counsel for a second opinion include those two legal opinions, because there is no disagreement between me and Mr. Gross. Our cases are in alignment, our opinions are in alignment. And I think that would be an important part of any independent second opinion provided to the town. I want to address very briefly the matter of bad faith, and I want to be very clear on behalf of my client that the only way an ICBL could be challenged under the Planning Act is not procedural, unless you make some terrible fundamental error, which your staff is not going to do. Provided you follow the Planning Act prescription for adopting an ICBL, the only way to be challenged in court is through the tort of bad faith. The law on this point, case law, is very clear that in order to make out a successful claim for bad faith, there has to be malfeasance. Somebody has to mislead somebody. There has to be a private motive, or something has to be found in evidence to show that the town acted in bad faith. In other words, they misled people, they just deceived people. That is not a prospect. That is not going to happen in this case. And so the courts have been very clear, even recently in the ClubLink case involving Oakville and the Glenelg Golf Course, that bad faith is just not something that is made out easily against townships when passing ICBL. The Planning Act, Section 38, is there for a reason. It's to allow you very broad power to put a pause on planning matters so that you can study matters of public interest. In our legal opinion that we provided to you on February the 24th, we were clear in terms of the issues that we thought that should be addressed through an ICBL. They would be an air quality control bylaw for the town of Milton. Oakville, of course, already has one. Your other neighbor in Burlington is currently studying the need for one. Second, the need for a study on the restrictions of the unproven and highly controversial extraction technique of underwater mining and blasting needs further study by the town. In addition, asphalt recycling in close proximity to populated areas and dry use industrial restrictions in high aquifer sensitivity areas are all something that need to be studied. The ICBL is a legal instrument that is provided to the township to make sure that those studies occur not in a vacuum, but they occur in the right sequence before future Planning Act approvals are made. And so whether it's the Joint Agency Review Team, the experts that you've heard from, or in particular from the residents, there is a clear need for this studies, as your even near neighbors, other municipalities in Halton region have already undertaken some of this work. So in my respectful submission, the rationale, the planning rationale or justification for this ICBL and those studies is very clearly made out. The final point that I wish to bring to your attention today has to do with how these matters are debated at council. I found it actually very interesting to listen to your previous deputants who discussed quite openly and quite candidly the need for an ICBL with council around the location of a new secondary school and the more controversial topic of where's the parking going to go. It's entirely appropriate to have those conversations in public so that the residents, the parents of the students can listen to council and understand what's in council's mind. In my respectful submission, it is entirely inappropriate and in fact illegal to take a similar discussion of the ICBL a similar ICBL concerning air quality controls and underwater mining and blasting in camera. The reason I say that is this: Section 239 of the Planning Act requires that council makes its deliberations in public, even under these trying circumstances. There are exemptions that are permitted under that section of the Municipal Act, but they are very tight and restrictive. Moving this discussion in camera could only be done under the rubric of litigation, or more importantly, pending litigation. But there is no pending litigation in this case. The Court of Appeal has been very clear with respect to the definition of what constitutes pending litigation. And if you allow me, I'll just read a brief excerpt from their decision. The fact that there might be, or even inevitably would be, litigation arising from the interim control bylaw does not make the subject matter under consideration potential or pending litigation. I think that that's very clear from the Court of Appeal. So that the only way taking this very important debate with respect to an ICBL and even the legal viability of the ICBL in camera would have to be done under the threat of pending litigation. If such a threat has been made against town council, then that should be disclosed. And most importantly, the joint agency review team should be stood down. Its work should cease until that pending litigation has been resolved. But certainly that should be brought to the attention of the public, because it's most likely that there is no pending litigation or even any threat of litigation. Then in my respectful submission, that means that the discussion of the ICBL does not fit within the definition of pending litigation under Section 239 of the Municipal Act. And in fact, the discussion of a future ICBL, even including a legal opinion with respect to its viability or legality, should be conducted in public. And in fact, we should be, our client, Action Milton, and other interested parties should be allowed the same opportunity as the previous deputants to appear before you to make their submissions regarding the need for such an ICBL. In conclusion, my client's plea, I think, is a simple one, which is please obtain this second legal opinion. It's very important and in the public interest that that be done. Most importantly, all of the intelligence that your worship and council has received, including the opinion of Mr. Ramsey and 2 senior legal opinions with respect to the ICBL, that should be included in any submission made to external legal counsel. That legal counsel should be chosen from a very short list. In my respectful submission, the lawyer that you choose under this opinion should have experience opposing a large-scale aggregate quarry and should also be familiar with the adoption of interim control bylaws. And that is a short list in the province of Ontario, and we'd be happy to make recommendations in terms of that short list. Finally, if and when that second legal opinion is rendered to the town, it's extremely important that it then be put in context in terms of your own decision making. Lawyers will agree or disagree all the time, and that doesn't mean that people don't proceed with litigation or stop themselves from litigating. The fact of the matter is that our office, or Dowlings, has not been provided with any case law whatsoever, which would suggest or strongly suggest that it wouldn't be warranted in this particular case. If those cases are going to be provided to council, then they should also be provided to council for residents. But at the end of the day, even if the legal opinion comes back and it is negative or does not recommend for an ICBL, what you'll have at the end of the day is 4 competing legal opinions, 2 in favor and 2 against. And that, in my opinion, at that time will represent a very clear choice for council. This will not be a technical decision. It won't be a legal decision. Ultimately, what you'll have in front of you is a political decision. And as a political decision, that should be made very much in public and should not be made until the public has had its say. With that, your worship and council, those are my respectful submissions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Donnelly. And again, members of council, there is another listed delegation. I'm not sure if any member of council has any questions or comments to Mr. Donnelly before I move on to Kim Bradshaw. Any member of council, any questions of Mr. Donnelly at this point? Mr. Donnelly, I know you're going to be reasonably close by there. And again, I'm going to hear from Kim Bradshaw in just a moment. So, and then I'm sure there'll be questions of my colleagues, maybe to you and Kim Bradshaw. So thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Nina, back over to you to try and bring in Kim Bradshaw.
Okay, just 1 minute, Your Worship. I'm just going to promote Kim to our main meeting. She should be over shortly. And Kim, if you could unmute and we see you. Excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah, Kim, welcome. I think we can hear you. If you can just do the 3, 2, 1, we'll make sure everybody can hear.
3, 2, 1.
I'm seeing my colleague signal that you're coming across loud and clear.
Great.
Welcome, if you would be so kind to make your presentation.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, councillors, for giving me the time today, especially since I was late with my delegation. I wanted to, first of all, support Action Milton and everything that their council has said here today. Sustainable Milton is of the opinion that an ICBL is the way to go and that we need one. And what I want to draw to your attention today, in that I am not a lawyer and certainly can't speak the way Mr. Donnelly can, but I want to bring your attention to the province's record in regards to the environment and support of the aggregate industry. Without this ICBL, we will have very little to defend ourselves. We know that to date we've had several asks for an environmental assessment. Parmgill himself did so, and yet there's been no move by the province to offer that support. We also have a recent petition by Ontario Nature bringing our attention to the fact that there are, I believe they're called, let me get the word correctly here, minister zoning orders. And apparently the Premier has been using this mechanism to make orders and remove orders without any public participation whatsoever. That's frightening to me because obviously he is trying to make things happen according to his plan, which may or may not be the public's plan. Another piece of legislation that is pending is Bill 132. I think everybody is probably familiar with this already, but I will draw your attention to an open letter from the Canadian Environmental Law Association to the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. And they clearly state, and I quote, CLEA's assessment of the proposed ARA changes reveals that this initiative is unlikely to maintain strong environmental protection or result in appropriate management of community impacts. More fundamentally, CLEA objects to the erroneous characterization of current ARA requirements as burdensome red tape that should be cut in order to benefit aggregate producers across Ontario. So we see what we're facing. Another piece of information, the LPAT, personal opinion, not legal, is that it is a questionable process to begin with. Why do we need a separate adjudication system instead of just going through our normal courts? Perhaps to expedite things in development, yes, but this court is ruled by one adjudicator, one person's opinion in regards to whether or not a developer's application is appropriate. That doesn't sound appropriate to me. That being said, the Premier has recently declined to renew no less than 4 adjudicators with environmental backgrounds. And according to the Globe and Mail, on February 7th, 2020, it states that they have replaced them with aggregate-friendly adjudicators, including a former chief lobbyist of Toronto's real estate development industry, which is concerning to say the least. I hope these points have brought home how important that ICBL will be to Milton as we face the potential for this quarry. We've also seen very recently that the LPAT ruled in favor of JDCL's hidden quarry application. Not sure how that could be even possible. So we need to pass that ICBL to ensure we have time to obtain an environmental assessment, which I believe will clearly show the high risk and dangers to our environment and residents, while simultaneously implementing protective bylaws, like Oakville's 2010 Clean Air Protection Bylaw. Milton definitely needs to get on some of these bylaws to protect our environment and our residents. As noted in my letter to council, Burlington passed an ICBL in March of last year, and to date, I was unable to find any public reference to ensuing litigation. So if we need to spend another $20,000, that's a small price for our safety. Sustainable Milton is confident that with the appropriate information and questions, the second opinion will be in favor of an ICBL, supporting the existing opinions of Action Milton, Donnelly Law, Gowling's law firm, and the planning opinion of Allen Ramsey Planning Associates Incorporated. So this is Sustainable Milton's opinion and my personal opinion, and I appreciate your time in listening to me today. Thank you.
Just stay reasonably close by. Again, members of council, what I'm going to suggest, if there's any question to either Mr. Donnelly or Ms. Bradshaw, this is certainly the time to do them. Any questions, comments, observations, and opinions, and I'm sure all of us have some input into this. So members of council, either Ms. Bradshaw or Mr. Donnelly, any questions? Again, every one of us are in receipt of the motion. I think it might be advantageous for anyone that's just listening to what we will be voting on in hopefully a reasonably short time. And I have a motion moved by Councillor Tesser-Dirksen, second by Councillor Best, and be it resolved. Whereas on March 30th, 2020, Milton Council convened into confidential session to discuss advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for the purpose with respect to legal opinion received from a citizens group regarding Reed Road Quarry. And whereas Milton Council wishes to seek additional advice with respect to that matter. Therefore, be it resolved that Council directs staff to obtain a second legal opinion on the efficiency and relative risk of adopting an interim control bylaw to allow for appropriate studies to be undertaken relative to the regulation of aggregate extraction options or operations from a second law firm with expertise in land use planning specific to aggregate extractions. And be it further resolved that staff be directed the selected lawyer to provide the option of a cost of no more than $20,000 inclusive of HST, with such options to be provided no later than 5:59 p.m. on Friday, June the 12th, 2020. And be it further resolved, the staff include in their instructions to the selected solicitor a complete file on this matter, including all correspondence from third parties. Okay, members of council, my apologies there for stumbling a little bit, but I wasn't quite sure if the further resolve made any sense to me, and maybe it does. And I'm just going to go back on it and be it resolved that staff direct the selected lawyer to provide the opinion of a cost. Now, I guess that makes sense. I was just wondering about the terminology on that. So yeah, I think I got it figured out. So members of council, your thoughts, and again, questions to the two delegates that presented before we get into it. Councillor Hamid and Councillor Challoner.
I don't have questions for the delegate, Mr. Mayor. I have some comments. Would you like me to hold them all, or would you like me to talk about them now?
Yeah, I would suggest maybe just hanging on to those comments for now. And again, I'm going to see if there's any questions of the Councillor Chandler. I'm getting the signal that you have no questions from the presenters, correct?
Correct. My questions are of staff, Your Worship.
Okay, very good. So I'm going to assume that there are no questions of Mr. Donnelly or Ms. Bradshaw. So I just want to thank both of those that present, and certainly they're more than welcome to stay tuned in, and we'll get into some of the questions and some of the debate now. So Councillor Hamid, Councillor Chalner, Councillor Clute, and Councillor Malboof in that order. Councillor Hamid.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a number of issues, so I guess I'll jump around a bit. Sometimes we see motions, or sometimes we see asks that appear good on paper and seem to make sense in the short run, but they actually hurt the cause. And I'm afraid that that's what might be happening here. I know councillors have moved and seconded a motion, and I have no doubt that they have the best of intentions. But for motions like this, I would have preferred a discussion beforehand, at least one-on-one, so we could come up with a collective strategy for achieving the end goal, because I don't think getting another opinion really helps, and I'll come back to it. One of the issues I had is that I heard about this motion first from other residents rather than my colleagues, rather than directly. And by the time I heard from residents, their minds were already made up on exactly what the right thing to do was. And some of the emails I received and some of the conversations I had, things were presented as either you support the people and support the area and support the environment and will vote for this motion, or you're against the environment and against the people. And that's really a false choice. That's a false dilemma. Those are not the only two choices we have. And to be clear, as regional councillors know, not just Milton Council, but all of the regional council, Burlington councillors, Oakville councillors, Halton Hill councillors, we all are completely on board with the end goal, which is to protect people, protect the area, and protect the environment, protect the residents. But the thing with this motion is that somehow we're not talking about that. We're talking about getting yet another opinion. And as you know, Mr. Mayor, we don't just have one opinion. We've heard from several different people. We have 3 or 4 different opinions now. We heard from Sustainable Milton, which I actually agree with, but we're right now not discussing ICBL. So despite the fact that I agree with what Kim Bradshaw said, that's not a topic of discussion right now. We had opinion we got from our solicitor, which unfortunately we can't discuss because it was received in a confidential session, which is why this motion is so tricky, because we can't really talk about the opinions we got. We have 2 different opinions from Action Milton, aligned opinion, but still 2 opinions. So I don't think getting yet another opinion helps, because ultimately, as has been mentioned many, many times by Action Milton and everyone else, ultimately it's a council's decision. And if we were discussing ICBL today, I would have different things to say. But right now, that's not the motion. The motion is to get yet another opinion. And I don't see how that brings clarity to anything. That if anything, it will convolute the issue even more, because now we're adding yet more point of view of somebody who doesn't have skin in the game and has nothing to lose and might not even live here. So my struggle with this motion is that we're actually not talking about the best strategy. We're not talking about what do we do to protect people, what do we do to protect the environment. We're just talking about talking, really. I mean, what we're talking about is how do we talk some more about this without actually making a decision. So at the end of the day, it would be the easiest thing for me to do would be to spend somebody else's $20,000. Like, it doesn't cost me anything, somebody else's money to get yet another opinion. But I don't think that's the right way to go. I actually, my opinion in this matter is not driven by other things I've heard. Like, I have an idea of exactly what to do, but that's not coming from other people. And somebody else coming in and saying yet another thing is not going to change that. So I don't think this motion is really necessary ultimately. I think if any of my colleagues, if any of the councillors have suggestion exactly what the council should do, then let's talk about that. But I don't really care to get several different opinions, because what's going to happen after the next opinion is that either half the council will say, hey, get another opinion, or the other half the council will say, let's get another opinion. Because if we get 2 different opposing opinions, then we're going to want to get a third opinion to break that tie. And I don't want to play that game. So I think, I hope my position's clear. The reason I wanted to talk is because some of the conversations I had this weekend, some of the residents were confused about what was being discussed. It was presented that we were discussing the bylaw today, and a lot of statements, and I know you've got email too, a lot of statements were like, you must support this, otherwise you're against the environment. Like, that's not what's happening here. And I'm worried that if we go on to get another opinion, I guarantee you, whichever side the opinion comes on, there'll be a demand for yet another opinion to break that tie. So let's not play that game. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Mead, thank you very much. Very well summed up. And again, I want to be right up front with my colleagues and the public as well. After all my colleagues have had their just say and their input, of course, I'll be commenting on it too. So I don't want to be seen for a moment on leading the debate, and that's not going to happen with me there. So Councillor Mead, thank you very much for your input. And Councillor Challoner.
Thanks, Your Worship. I don't support the motion, and I'll set out my reasons why. First of all, we have a process that we're currently engaged in with the region, ourselves, the applicant, and Conservation Halton, which will look at all of the issues that have been identified so far based on what I've read and seen. The second thing is that when it comes to air quality and water quality, that is the purview of the province of Ontario. And the Ministry of Environment has responsibility for air and water quality, and the Ministry of Natural Resources has responsibility for a permit. And permits in the province of Ontario for a long, long time have required a lot of air study and a lot of water study and soil study and whatever else is required, given the nature of the permit. And so I've been involved in these applications for a number of years, almost 40. And I certainly understand what is being proposed by the applicant. It's not the first time that Milton has had quarries, set within its boundaries. Won't be the last, I guess, given the nature of development. But I am confident that if we look at the DART process and follow it, there's also a permit process that follows that. And at that time, we may decide to change the strategy that we currently have in place. But I think that, we deserve, as the town of Milton, to see the current process through to fruition. I would also say that there is case law that supports what the town of Milton has done so far as council in terms of its discussions. There's also case law that indicates that making attempts to institute an interim control bylaw or other measures like designating something heritage following an application is viewed as bad faith. The law is there. And I would add to that the list of good lawyers in the town, in the province of Ontario and indeed nationally, who deal with these matters is a longer list than Mr. Donnelly thinks. It's a good long list. So I'm quite confident that the current path is the right path. When we get to the end of the first phase of that path, which is DART, my view may change. But at this point, I don't support the resolution.
Thank you, Councillor Fluid.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Thank you to my colleagues who have touched on a number of points that I was going to bring up. First of all, we did receive a number of phone calls and emails over the weekend as requested by Action Milton, and many of us have had opportunities to speak with some and return some emails, so nothing has all been returned. So if those are watching and if you haven't received a reply, you will very soon. I'm not supportive of this motion whatsoever because the precedent that it's going to set, again, as I believe Councillor Hamid brought up, excuse me, like what's going to happen is we'll have two differing opinions if there's a differing opinion in the second one, and then we're going to have someone probably say, well, let's get a third and then a fourth. Where does it end? And I've only been on council for about 10 years. Your Worship and a few others have been around the table for a number of years. I can't recall any other time that we've asked for a second opinion when our highly qualified legal team and legal staff has given us their legal opinion. And to me, I think it's almost insulting to be asking for this. Again, with Councillor Hamid, I also wish that there could have been a little bit more discussion with each individual member of council or in small groups. So I know we don't want to congregate in more than groups of 5, but a little bit more of a heads up for discussion would have been on this. But we received a legal opinion, and we've taken action or not taken action on certain things. Councillor Challenor brought up the JART process, which is ongoing, and the review that MPP Parmgill has asked for. Yes, there hasn't been an answer, but that we haven't heard no. So I know that that process is continuing on. So it's not like this council is not advocating to listen to the residents. I don't like the fact, again, where we're sort of almost being painted into a corner that if we don't support getting a second opinion or don't support this, then we're anti-environment, then we're anti-this. It's absolutely not the case. We represent the residents of Milton to the best of our ability, all areas, whether it be rural or urban, and we're going to continue to do so because this is a corporation of the town of Milton. So long story short, I don't support the motion. I think that we have received quality legal advice so far, and we should be heading in the direction that we're going. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Clute. Councillor Melba, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A lot of the points I was going to raise have been touched on, so hopefully I won't repeat them. But I want to first start off by saying I have some major concerns about how we have been dealing with this sensitive and controversial issue. And even what we're doing today, I have some concerns on. We received a presentation by Mr. Donnelly from Donnelly Laws, who represents Action Milton, and he made a lot of statements concerning what we can and can't do, what should be done, what should not be done. But Mr. Mayor, I'm not a lawyer. I don't have the expertise, the legal expertise to respond to his statements. And that's why I wish our solicitor was here to respond and maybe answer some questions we have. And that was the whole reason behind notices of motion was brought forward, so that this type of things don't happen, that we have an opportunity given time to look at the issue before it having to be dealt with. And that's not what's happening here. We, but more importantly, the citizens of Milton are only hearing one side of the statement of the legal argument. And that is the legal argument being put forward by Donnelly Law. So I have a problem with that. As you know, Mr. Mayor, we spent a lot of time on this matter in an in-camera session where we received legal opinion from our town solicitor, as well as a recommendation. Unfortunately, that information cannot be made public. And in my opinion, that is wrong. The legal opinion we received, along with the recommendation, should, in my opinion, be made public. The members of Action Milton, the residents of Campbellville, and the taxpayers of Milton as a whole have a right to know what we as council are basing our decision on. Now, there may be some legal reasons we can't do that. But again, I'm not a lawyer. But as a member of council, I cannot reveal what was discussed or refer to the recommendation we received from our town solicitor. Yet, Mr. Mayor, it seems that that information is now public knowledge. Just the other day, I received a phone call from a member of Action Milton, and during our discussion, he said, I understand that council has received the legal opinion that if you were to implement an interim control bylaw at this time, the town could be looking at a lawsuit being brought forward by James Dick. Just yesterday on Facebook, there was a posting by Mr. Nasser that stated, the town received legal advice against supporting an ICBL. Where are they getting their information from? But again, so that side of it, but we can't respond. Now, Mr. Mayor, this council has made it quite clear on a number of occasions that we have concerns about the reopening and the potential negative impact it would have on water quality, the environment, and the quality of life for the residents in the affected area. And we will be putting those concerns forward once the JART process begins. I do not believe, Mr. Mayor, there is one member of this council who believes reopening this quarry is a good thing. But Mr. Mayor, there is a process that must be followed in dealing with such matters, and that process is unfolding as it should. Now, Mr. Mayor, you recall upon receiving a request from Action Milton that council implement that interim control bylaw, council directed staff to seek a legal opinion on this request from our town solicitors. I'll affirm, Mr. Mayor, that this town has been using and relying on for 20 years, for more than 20 years. As you know, We have received that independent legal opinion. We spent thousands of taxpayer dollars to get it. But because some members of this council and Action Milton Group do not agree with that opinion, we are now being asked to spend another $20,000 for a second opinion. First of all, as Councillor Cluett says, where does it end? What if the second opinion is similar to the original? Do we seek a third opinion? Do we keep going until we get an opinion that Action Milton supports? And if the second opinion is contrary to the first, as Councillor Mead mentioned, do we seek a third to break that tie? Finally, Mr. Mayor, we have received a legal opinion and a recommendation from our town solicitors, a law firm that has represented the town and council for more than 20 years, a law firm that has always provided us with sound, solid advice on many issues, some of them much more complicated than this one. So what message will we be sending to them were we to support this motion? That despite your years of service to the town on this issue, we do not accept your opinion or recommendation, and so we will be reaching out to an outside law firm that has no connection or history with the town of Milton. Now, Mr. Mayor, you know, over the 15 years that I have served on this council, I've had to rely on the advice received from our town solicitors. Now, Mr. Mayor, I will say there were times over those 15 years when the council of the day did not accept the recommendation of our solicitors. But Mr. Mayor, every time we did that, it ended up costing the taxpayers of Milton. And I suspect that is what would happen here. Mr. Mayor, I have complete confidence in our town solicitors and the advice and recommendations they have provided, that those recommendations are in the best interest of this council, the corporation, and the taxpayers of Milton. And despite my personal feelings on this quarry, and as sympathetic as I am to the concerns of the Campbellville residents, as someone elected to represent the interests of all Milton taxpayers, I unfortunately cannot support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Melbuff. Councillor Tesser-Dirksen next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My colleagues have certainly given me lots of points to respond to, and I certainly, first off, will say, I think we all have the right intentions and we all want to see the same result. The question is, how do we get there and what's the best strategy? With respect to the legal opinion that we have, I never said I disagreed with it. What I'm saying is that we have one legal opinion from a lawyer retained by us and paid by us to provide. The outside legal opinions by Mr. Donnelly and by Gallings were not solicited by us. We did not instruct those lawyers to provide us that information. We didn't retain them and we didn't pay them. So technically speaking, they're not really a legal opinion for us in that respect. That's why we felt that having a second legal opinion by a lawyer retained by us would be more robust in coming to a decision. The questions that sometimes residents have about these types of procedures, and Councillor Malbuff's absolutely correct, it would be much easier for all of us if we could talk to residents about why we're in the position we're in by being able to disclose that confidential information, but we can't and we don't. That being said, residents want to understand where we're coming from. In the first legal opinion that was given to us, and I want to make it very clear, I have utmost confidence in our staff and the way that they instructed the lawyer. However, we were not really a part of that instruction to the lawyer. So part of the purpose of this motion is to include material that we know a little bit about. And it's not so much about seeking a different opinion, so much as it is being able to answer residents when they want to hold us accountable for the decision we eventually make. If we get asked, okay, did you guys even seek a second opinion? And our answer is, well, gee, no, we didn't. I mean, that seems like a pretty basic, if not weak answer. I think it's incumbent upon us to seek out as much information in the most fulsome way that we can, if for no other reason that we can answer our residents confidently that we did everything we possibly could within our power and within reason to get to the decision we did. It actually makes it easier for us when we're explaining why we decide whatever we end up deciding with respect to this ICBL. So that's one of the reasons this motion is on the table. Secondly, a few councillors mentioned that they would have liked to have been spoken to prior, and I'm always a little bit uncertain how to approach this type of thing because I fully believe that these types of things should be discussed only in open session with the public observing so that there's no perception of behind the scenes discussions. At the same time, I know it's something that's rather risky that's kind of been sprung on people, especially since we're waiving the notice. And again, the only reason we're asking to waive the notice is because of the time sensitivity. In any other situation, I would love to have our counsel here to answer questions. And I actually have one for him that I won't get answered today because he's not here. So I do apologize for anyone who felt sideswiped or overwhelmed by the motion, but that's where I'm coming from when I'm not reaching out in advance to sit down and talk to you face to face about it. I just think it's more important to have the public understand, again, for transparency, that everything's being discussed here with them observing, unless it's deemed confidential. I certainly don't want our lawyer to be insulted. I mean, Councillor Cluett said it's almost an insult to ask for a second opinion. This isn't personal. It's happened to me in my professional capacity a number of times. People are just looking for a fulsome answer. And again, they want to be able to say, you know what, we were satisfied with the first, we got a second. Admittedly, we have to make sure it doesn't become a slippery slope. We're not going to go for a third opinion. I mean, there's only so much that's reasonable. I think it's reasonable to get one second opinion in this context. I think that's all I have to say to address that. I mean, we're not voting on the ICBL today. Okay, it's not on the agenda. But when the time comes, if it comes, that we do end up voting on the ICBL, I personally would like to have more information than less. And in this particular question, the health and safety of the residents in this area, their very way of life threatens to be affected by this. I can sympathize with them wanting to have more transparency and having confidential information made public. I'm wary of that. I understand that Section 239 of the Municipal Act deals with the discretion of council to decide whether or not a matter is confidential. It's up to us to decide whether or not information should be on the advice of our council. If information should be made public, the double-edged sword here is that if it's made public, a potential opponent will also know what we've been advised and have some insight into our strategy. And I don't know if that's necessarily something we want. So again, I don't think there's an easy answer to that question. Perhaps it's a discussion we can have further with our lawyer. So I did have one question for staff. I don't know if now's the appropriate time, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, let's deal with it, Councillor, as we proceed. So yeah, go ahead with your question.
Thank you. And it rather leads out of my last point with respect to making confidential information public. It's my understanding that it is, again, at the discretion of council with our lawyer that confidential information is governed by solicitor-client privilege. Like that's a rule of the relationship between a client and solicitor. If information is privileged, then we keep it privileged. It's up to us whether or not we want to waive that privilege. Mr. Donnelly mentioned that it could be potentially illegal, and I'm not familiar with what he would be relying on in that context. And again, our lawyer's not here to provide that information, and I certainly am not prepared to speculate on it in my role. So maybe that's, I don't know if staff have insight they can give us there, or if it's something we'll have to defer until we can speak to our lawyer.
I would rather suspect it might be the second, but I think, Councillor, on that point, I'm going to go to our CEO, Andrew, and then Troy McHarg, who's one of our other senior people as well, might have some input on that. So I just want to leave it hanging out there. So, oh, I'm sorry, I've just been informed that our solicitor is on the line. So, Councillor Tesser-Dirksen, if you can just hang there for a moment. I'm going to go to Nina. If you could bring our solicitor on, Nina.
I've just promoted Constantine. He should be making his way over to our screen in a second. And I will just ask our solicitor to turn on his sound. Oh, there he is.
Constantine, can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. Can you hear me?
Yeah, very good. Thank you very much. And again, I'm not sure if you heard Councillor Tesser-Dirksen's question there. Did you hear it loud and clear?
So if I could ask Councillor Dirksen to frame it again. I understood it as a question regarding the comments on going in camera. If that's correct, then I can proceed.
Yeah, Councillor Tesser-Dirksen, if you would.
Yeah, good to see you, Constantine. Thank you. So the question was with respect to Section 239 of the Municipal Act, which governs open sessions versus when we move into in-camera. I understood, and I'm not a municipal lawyer, but I understood Section 239 to mean that it is that legal discussions are at our discretion to decide whether or not they should be discussed in camera or not. I believe Mr. Donnelly mentioned that it actually could be interpreted as contrary to the law that we have these types of discussions in camera. And I'm just looking to see if you have any comment or some clarity on that.
I do. Councillor, you're correct. You can go in camera to receive solicitor-client advice. It's actually a specific provision in the Municipal Act that's separate from the litigation provision. 239(1)(2) has a lot of subsections. There's a lot of different reasons why council could go into an in-camera session. E is the litigation or potential litigation exception, but F is the advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege. So Mr. Donnelly commented on a case, RSJ Holdings. It's a court, it went to the Court of Appeal. Actually, I also went to the Supreme Court, although he didn't quote from there. That case didn't involve legal advice. So that case involved a municipality, City of London, that in an 8-minute span passed 31 bylaws without discussion, without public discussion, including an interim control bylaw. And they did discuss it in camera, and the reasons they provided and when their decision was challenged in the court was, well, litigation can arise out of an interim control bylaw, so that's our defense. And of course, the court disagreed very strongly. There was a subsequent decision in the same year. It's Farber in the City of Kingston, which actually specifically looked at whether RSJ Holdings applies to solicitor-client advice, and it found it didn't. It said perfectly fine to go in camera for that. So, the council's practice for very good reason is to go in camera for solicitor-client advice. Most councils, that's their practice, and it's generally a good one.
Councillor Tesser Dirksen, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks, Constantine, for that answer. That does clarify things. I believe that's all I have, Mr. Mayor. And again, I want to thank my colleagues for indulging us with this waiver of notice and for their careful and measured consideration in moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And again, our solicitor, I know, will be standing by as we proceed with this item. But I do have a, Constantine, thank you very much. And I know you're still going to be there. Councillor Best, you're next on the speakers list. Councillor Best.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, and thanks to Constantine for your advice here. I agree with Councillor Tesser Dirksen's comments. This is the place where we discuss council business, not privately one-on-one. This is something that we brought together, and councillors are well aware of the situation. We have an opinion from our lawyer. We have a second opinion from a different group, which we didn't seek. What I'm asking for, along with Councillor Tesser Dirksen, is to have an opinion looking at all the information. My background as appraiser, this is a common practice. When you have two opinions on a property value and fundamental disagreement, you ask for a third opinion. That one, after reviewing all the information, will make the advice to us. And that's what I'm asking for. I've respected and heeded our lawyer's advice, and I've not discussed the in-camera material with anyone else. So I resent that implication. People can make their own assumptions on this discussion, but this is something that's very important. Not only the people of Campbell, but for the whole of the area. And by the way, we have had interim control bylaws before, as our staff have advised us, as well as Oakville and Burlington. This is something that we should look at, because I do not have a lot of confidence in where the province is going on this issue. We should have heard back now regarding environmental assessment. We have not. We have a timeline for August in terms of getting provincial approvals for this quarry. I want to make sure we have all the facts on the table and we have an informed decision. And Your Worship, that's the end of my comments.
Thank you, Councillor Best. And again, I'm at the end of the first-time speakers, and I'm going to determine if there's any first-time speakers now before I go to second-time speakers. Okay, Councillor Cluett.
Thank you very much again, Your Worship, and I appreciate everybody's comments. I won't belabor this too long. I think we should just get to a vote and move on. Just getting a feeling from the discussion that's been going around is that we're not sure of where we're going to go after this. So I was just going to ask staff or Constantine, what's the process going forward? we deal with this motion. Let's say it does not pass. We don't deal with any second opinions, and we just continue on with our regular process. The JART and the provincial, working with our member of provincial parliament and getting an EA and the council advocacy. So is that how it's going now? Like once we deal with the second opinion stuff, this is the last we're going to hear of it?
To our solicitor, Constantine, maybe you're the best to advise us, Councillor Clute, on his question.
So council's instructions to staff are to proceed with the JART process. So until those instructions change, that's the process. Of course, you know, the council can bring a motion, anybody can bring a motion. If it gets voted by the majority of council, then those instructions can change. But right now, that's the way we're proceeding.
Councillor Clute.
Thank you. And the other question I had is, I know that we've talked about, oh, well, some people get second opinions on things. When was the last time the town of Milton got a second opinion on any of our legal opinions from, let's say, the last 2 or 3 years?
Well, I'm not going to speculate myself on that. I don't certainly recall, but you know, Ms. Koopmans or Andrew Siltala, our CEO, I don't recall any, but there may be.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, at my fingertips, I don't recall one.
Councillor Clute.
That's all I needed to know, is that it's not commonplace here in the municipal world. Like I said, in the last 10 years that I've been on council, this is the first that we've had any kind of request looking for a second opinion. Sometimes we don't agree with our legal opinion. Sometimes we don't agree with our staff opinion. And council makes decisions. And I think our council is going to make this decision as we have, and to continue on with the JART process. So that's all I have. And I look forward to seeing the vote.
Okay, thank you very much. I have one more speaker before we get to that. And then again, you're going to hear from me at the end of it. Councillor Chandler.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, so just a couple things. First of all the questions that I heard raised by Councillor Tester-Dirksen can be answered through the DART process, whether Ms. Koopmans prepares a report to council, or however she chooses to have that communication. And quite frankly, everything that is raised in DART should be everything that needs to be raised with respect to the application. So it should be quite fulsome in terms of the level of information that is shared. The other thing I want to make clear is council acted properly when it went in camera, and that's been supported by our counselor on this issue, by our legal individual on this matter. And I don't want there to be any sense that it wasn't anything but properly handled. It was, and there was good reason for us to do what we did. Your Worship, the final piece is around the process itself. Again, the province has done nothing to change the current legislation. It has accepted thoughts from all matter of the public in this province. Ourselves, the conservation authorities we're associated with, the regional governments we're associated with, individual members of the public, special interest groups, etc. Everybody has had the opportunity to give their view about how environmental legislation should proceed in this province. It has been put on hold. I think we all understand why. It may not change. The best we can do is to continue to go down the path that we're on until we know differently. And frankly, the path we're on is, I think, the proper path. To just one final thing with respect to Councillor Clute's question about, have we ever sought a second opinion? In the 15 years that I served before, we never did, and we dealt with much, much larger land issues than this.
Thank you very much. That does conclude the speakers list that I have at this moment. For the first time or the second time speakers, is there anyone that wishes to have his or her say at this moment? If not, let me conclude on that. It's been a busy weekend, I think, for most of us. And again, as mentioned on 2 or 3 occasions, I had several phone calls and several emails, and hopefully each one of them had been responded to, maybe not to everybody's satisfaction, but at least I think they've been heard, at least from me, and I know that pretty well every one of my colleagues have had the same calls and the same emails. As mentioned earlier on, of course, and it's absolutely correct that this will be a political decision, but we make political decisions on the best advice that we get. 9 times out of 10, that is from our solicitors. And again, as mentioned as well, we don't always take that. But when we don't take that, that's when we 9 times out of 10 get into trouble, believe it or not, because they're political decisions. Keeping in mind that I've been in this business for a long, long time, I know how politics are played by us politicians, and I know how the general public plays the politicians as well. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's called a democratic society. And I very much support that. On the question of bad faith and leaks, I always get a little concerned on being accused of bad faith. But if there was any perception out there with bad faith on any of our part, there's always recourse for that, and it's called the ombudsman. And I've mentioned that a couple of times in some of the conversations that I've had over the weekend on calling into question what council was doing, including myself. So that really, disturbs me to some degree when we're accused of bad faith. So there's always that. And always a concern, of course, when you hear the rumors, whether they're leaks or not. And that was alluded to as well. So I always get very concerned about that. So with that, there is no further discussion on this. Councillor Best?
Yes, Your
Councillor
Worship.
Best?
Thanks for your comment. Just requesting a recorded vote.
Yeah, because if somebody didn't do it, I was going to do it myself as well, because I think it's really, really important that the public know exactly what's happening here and why. So any further questions on the recorded vote? I'm going to hand it over to the clerk, and I think she's going to suggest in favor or oppose or yay or nay or whatever she's going to direct us here. And she'll do it according to, I believe, our seating arrangement. So Madam Clerk, over to you to take the independent vote. I know normally we stand when this happens, but that's not possible under these circumstances. So Madam Clerk. Now, again, we are talking about the motion, the notice of motion put on by Councillor Tesser Dirksen, and that's what we're voting on. So be very clear that you might just want to enunciate that, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Your Worship. So yes, this is with respect to item number 3 under items for consideration, the notice of motion with respect to a second legal opinion. As the mayor mentioned, it would likely be best just for audio if members could indicate either in favor or opposed. So I will begin with Councillor Cluett.
Opposed.
Councillor Ali.
Opposed.
Councillor Best.
In favor.
Councillor Challenor.
Opposed.
Councillor Di Lorenzo.
In favor.
Councillor Malbuff.
Opposed. Opposed.
Councillor Tesser Dirksen.
In favor, please.
Councillor Hamid.
Opposed.
Mayor Krantz. Sorry, could you repeat that again?
Opposed.
And the motion fails. That motion fails 6-3. 6 opposed, 3 in favor.
Thank you very much to all the participants that presented on this issue here today. So, and again, it's far from being over, and I think I'd be safe to say that everyone of my colleagues, including myself, is on side with the action group on attempting to make sure that there's not a quarry there. Now, if that sounds biased on my part, so be it. I've gone on public record to that effect on more than one occasion. I go on the public record on supporting what the action group is doing. So and I think I speak for every one of my colleagues presently. So with that, that ends that. So Madam Clerk, that is defeated. Now we're moving down to the procedure bylaw. And again, I'm going to read the resolution here. Moved by Councillor Betts and seconded by Councillor Lee. Be it resolved that the draft procedure bylaw attached as Appendix A be considered at the June council meeting for approval, and further that staff be authorized to make any minor modifications as deemed necessary prior to council consideration of the bylaw. Councillor Hamid, I believe that you wish to speak to this.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple of amendments that I'd like to bring up. I'm not sure if the clerk would like to read them or if I should go one by one.
Yeah, possibly the clerk could read those out so everybody's familiar with what's being suggested.
Thank you. So we have two amendments. So we could begin with the first one, that the proposed bylaw include amendments to the order of the agenda to allow delegations to speak near the beginning of council meetings.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, if I may.
On that.
Right. So this is that's what the region does as well. And there has been instances in the past where we've had a report come forward that takes a while and delegates have had to wait. I can think of two specific issues in this very term of council where some people actually left before they could delegate or before they could present. So I think following what the region does would be a great approach, where we allow the delegates to speak first, and that way they have the option to stay when the report is debated, or just speak to the council and leave and get on with their lives and find out later how we voted. Currently, what happens is that, well, after COVID-19, outside of COVID-19 at least, we ask people to show up at 7 p.m., but they might speak at 9, they might speak at 10. We can't predict that at all. So that's why the reason I didn't bring up before, I brought up before privately, but the reason I never tried to amend the procedural bylaw before is because I wanted to see how well it worked at the region. It works pretty well at the region, as you know, Mr. Mayor. So those are my thoughts on this specific amendments.
Okay, yeah, now, Madam Clerk, that's the one amendment. Did you have another one there as well? We might as well deal with both of them right now.
Madam Clerk?
Thank you. So the second one is that member statements be added to the order of the agenda for council meetings near the end of the meeting, and that staff be directed to include associated provisions for a 2-minute speaking limit for members and for members to speak only once during member statements.
Yeah, as you know, Mr. Mayor, we used to have member statements at the end of council agenda. Earlier in the last term, we got rid of it because it was abused by it was abused because people use them for grandstanding and for a lot of other things. But I think a right approach we could have done is put a speaking limit. So, I'm suggesting a couple of minutes max, and you get to only speak once, because there are times where things happen in your ward that you want to acknowledge, or you want to recognize someone who's done something heroic, or you want to recognize an event, or you want to announce an event. So from time to time, there are things where members of council want to highlight something. So I think the reason I'm amending it is because I think it'd be worthwhile to bring that back and see how well it works. And if it doesn't work, we'll get rid of it again. Thank you.
Well, I certainly concur with that and support the amendments. But members of council, any questions on the recommendation as you see it in report 033-20 and or the amendments? Councillor Challoner and Councillor Melba.
Thanks, Your Worship. I'm supportive of what Councillor Hamid is recommending as amendments. I would add consideration by council of reducing the time that deputants have to 5 minutes from 10 minutes unless they make a specific request for 10 minutes. I've appeared before a number of municipal councils across Canada over the last several years, and most of them are 5 minutes in length, not 10. And I think that people can, for the most part, get their points across in 5 minutes rather than 10. My other question, Your Worship, or comment, is with respect to the council workshops. We had one in the first quarter. It was not related necessarily to financial. It was another matter. What is staff's plan in terms of council workshops to the remainder of the year?
Andrew?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we've talked about dividing up staff workshops between some financial as they're required, and then some planning related workshops that are required. So we don't have a schedule at this point for them, but we planned on using that finance slot that we had sort of penciled in to make the workshops a little bit more varied this year. Chalmers?
Sorry, Councillor Challoner, you're going to have to unmute again.
Okay, that's fine, but I think that given the environment we're in, financial workshops I think are pretty important. They're basically at the foundation of the issues that we're going to face this year and certainly in the next couple of years. And so I can think of a couple topics and I'll take that offline. But
okay.
I certainly am supportive of what is being resolved here, but I really do believe that this extra focus is required. It was put in place for good reason, and that has not changed. But Your Worship, I am in favor of Councillor Hamid's recommendations, and I think Council should also take a look at how long deputants speak at the beginning of our meetings.
For Challoner as well. No, and again, I do have a speakers list, but Councillor Best and Councillor Ali, you're the movers and seconders of this, and I'm going to assume for a moment that hopefully you're in favor of what Councillor Challoner is suggesting, as well as what Councillor Hamid has put forward. So you just might want to think about that for a moment before I get to it. So with that, Councillor Malbeuf.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I support the two amendments put forward by Councillor Mead. I don't know if he needs a seconder. I'd be prepared to second it. And I was planning to bring forward an amendment on my own to reduce the delegation speaking time from 10 to 5 like we do at the region. 5 minutes, as Councillor Challoner said, is more than enough time. We've all been involved in all candidate debates or witnessed them, and you're given 2 to 3 minutes to give your introduce yourself, put forward your platform and what your positions are. And like I say, you have to do that in 2 to 3 minutes. So 5 minutes is plenty of time. And the other concern is, we've had delegations of 10 to 12 people coming up to speak. If 10 minutes each, you're looking at 2 hours before we even get to council time to deal with an issue. And that's not really fair to the people sitting in the audience or at the council meeting, waiting for us to deal with another issue down the agenda. So, I don't know if Councillor Challoner, if it's a formal amendment. Again, I'm prepared to second that. And
I think Councillor Malbeuf, if I might, and that's why I went to Councillor Best and Councillor Ali, just so as it makes it fairly simple. If they're in favor of incorporating that into the main motion. Councillor Best, you're the mover?
Yes, I would, as long as it's not abused.
Okay, I agree with that. So yeah. Councillor Ali?
I'm
You're the
completely in
seconder.
favor. Yes, Your Worship. Through you, I'm
Having
completely
that
in favor.
included in the main motion.
Yes.
Okay. And again, keeping in mind that we don't have it written out, but keeping in mind what both Councillor Malbeuf and Councillor Challoner are suggesting on the timing. So staff has made a note of that. And when the procedural bylaw will come back, I suspect it'll have that incorporated into it. With that clear understanding. Councillor Clud, I had you next.
Thank you, Your Worship. Again, I just want to speak in favor of the amendments, adding the delegations to speak first. It does work really well at the regional level. Gets all of that out of the way. We have seen so many times where, again, if someone was to speak on this motion today, if we had started at 7 o'clock, it would be now almost 9:30 before they would get a chance to speak on an item. So it is good to have them speaking first at the meetings and the member statements. And I can't find any time where any one of us before or after this council have actually abused member statements. Anyways, I'm kidding. Thanks very much.
Okay, that's on the lighter side. As mentioned by one of my colleagues a short while ago, there was the odd occasion that it was abused for sure. And we can govern ourselves fairly well too. And I agree with it, because it's important that those little messages, and I think it was Councillor Hamid that mentioned it, you know, forget about the notice of motion saying I'm going to be talking about this in 2 or 3 weeks. Well, it's gone. Just to say even thank you to somebody or some group that's done something, or make the community aware of some upcoming event. That's really what it was all about. And it really worked really well. But it was abused from time to time. But being that, and again, Councillor Best and Councillor Hali has agreed to, in the motion, to have those 2 amendments as suggested incorporated into the main motion. Now I'm going to assume, unless I see a hand go up, that everyone's in favor of that. And again, I'm seeing no opposition, so I thank you very much, and that is carried. I have a resolution moved by Councillor Betts and seconded by Councillor Ali, and be it resolved that the draft community standards bylaw recommended as option 3 and attached as Appendix A be considered at the June council meeting for approval. And further, that prior to council consideration of the draft bylaw attached as Appendix A, staff be authorized to make any amendments necessary as recommended by legal counsel. And what we're talking about, members of council, of course, is report 02720 with the, you know, the bylaws, as it refers to as there's donation community bins, housekeeping amendments to clean yards bylaw and community standards bylaw. So that's the issue that we're talking about. And that's for the benefit of the public that's listening out there and wondering what this might be about. Speakers to this motion? Councillor Cluett.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I really am excited about seeing this report, as I know residents around Milton are. We've all received in the last couple of weeks emails from people when they see donation bins overflowing. We've seen it on the news, and I was just around Barclay Circle in my ward just yesterday, and right over by CIBC on the corner part of the road that faces onto the houses, there's a donation bin. And the junk that has been compiled out there is just overflowing almost onto the street. And and the top question we get is, when are we going to do something to address this? So I'm glad that we're moving forward. I can't wait for the bylaw to come back at the next council meeting, and thank staff for all their hard work.
Thank you, Councillor Chandler.
Your Worship, likewise, just want to thank staff for their hard work on this. The issue that I've had and Rick and I have had is in Ward 2 on Laurier Avenue, and it's been a problem for a while. So thank you, staff.
Thank you. Any further speakers on this item? If not, I will assume that majority of us are in favor of that. And again, unless I see a hand go up. Being none, that's carried. Read the bylaw, or read the resolution moved by Councillor Betts and seconded by Councillor Ali. Be it resolved that the borrowing limit for Milton Hydro Distribution Inc. MHDI be increased to $80 million, subject to the following conditions being maintained by MHDI. A, the debt to capital ratio remaining at or below 60%. B, the current ratio remaining above 1.1.1. C, the debt service coverage ratio remaining above 1.15.1. And that MHDI annually provide to the town's treasurer an annual compliance letter or waiver with respect to the covenants. And number 3, that the future borrowing of Milton Energy and Generation Solution Inc., known as MEGS, remain contingent on the approval of Town Council following the presentation of a business case related to each initiative. And again, Councillor Melboof and Councillor Best, I know that you're Milton's reps on the Hydro Board, and I just wonder if either one of you gentlemen have anything to add to this resolution. Councillor Best, anything? Or Councillor Melboof?
No, it's Your Worship, it's explained in the report and gives the Hydro Board some flexibility in terms of future investments.
Thank you. Councillor Melboof, anything further?
Yeah, no, just further what Councillor Best said, like I said, the report is there. You know, the mandate and the structure of Milton Hydro is changing, and they do need these slight changes. The CFO treasurer has made sure that the town is protected by it. So I would ask council to support this.
I thank both of you very much for that. Members of council, you've heard the resolution. Any questions? If not, I will assume that majority of us in favor, and again, unless I see a hand go up, that it's carried. And again, members of council, the next one, there's 5 recommendations there, and I know that each one of you have it before you there, but I'm going to read it out for the benefit of the people that is probably listening, so they're aware of what's evolving with the finances. And again, I have a resolution moved by Councillor Betts and seconded by Councillor Ali, and be it resolved that the 2020 final tax rates for the town of Milton that are identified in Appendix D, including a general tax rate for the town that is based on a levy requirement of $68,886,916 as assessment growth of 2.49% be approved. And that the final due dates for 2020 tax payments that are identified in Appendix D be approved, including the deferral of the 3rd installment of the regular billing and due date installment programs to August 31st and the 4th installment to October 30th. And the staff be authorized to administer the COVID-19 tax deferral by application program as outlined in Appendix A. That overdue tax notice fees as presented on Schedule H of bylaw 071-2019 user fee bylaw be waived for the month of July and September 2020. Number 5, and that the final tax rate bylaw on today's agenda be considered for approval. And that, members of council, is the resolution before us. Any questions, Councillor Chandler?
Thanks, Your Worship. Very supportive of what is being proposed, and I just thought that the tax deferral information on the back gives you some sense of what the uptake has been so far, and that may prove to be valuable information to your committee on reopening the Halton economy. I think you guys are meeting tomorrow, at least your first meeting is tomorrow.
Yeah, yes, exactly true, yeah.
And they may find this report interesting and helpful.
I believe that that's already going to be part of the discussions, Councillor Chandler, tomorrow. And very much look forward to that, as a matter of fact. Councillor Chandler, any further? Any other questions on this motion? I will assume that it's carried. And one small editorial on my part. I know with the COVID-19 tax deferral, I would still encourage any individual that can afford to pay their taxes on the due dates, please do so, because there's a bit of a challenge there. So I know some of us can make them on the regular dates, but there is that odd individual that will need that deferral and no penalty on that. So I'd encourage anyone that can certainly pay on time. So with that, notice of motion, I believe, is the next. And this is by Councillor Hamid and Councillor Chalner.
Mr. Mayor, since we're discussing the motion, the next council meeting, I'll just hold my comments to that meeting.
Your worship, I think you just have to be unmuted. You are currently muted.
Okay, I think Megan's got me there now. So, and I think really what, as I understand it, it's the reporting to council. I have no issues with reports being done to council there. So I'm not sure, Councillor Hamid, if and Councillor Chandler, mover and seconder, it's fairly lengthy there, but there's a lot of great stuff in there. So, but I'm not sure, Councillor Hamid, this was your motion.
Yeah, sorry, I had a brain freeze. I thought this was, I mean, it's introduced today, but I thought it was being considered in the next council meeting and not today. So I apologize for that. There are a number of reports that that I think, in order for council to provide proper oversight to the Corporation of Town of Milton, we should be getting. In this motion, we're not necessarily requiring anything specific. We're just, asking staff to look at some of the options and come back to us later to figure out what the right set of reports should be that doesn't increase unnecessary work for staff while giving council information. So there's simple reports like we used to get, like consistent Milton Transit report, Milton Fire Department report. As you noticed, Mr. Mayor, recently there were questions about number of firefighters and stuff, but I did not, when I was asked those questions, I did not have, staffing level, response time, and other key performance indicators available that I could use to answer those questions. Bylaw enforcement is another issue where I would love to know what the average response time is in bylaw, how many outstanding issues we have. I would like to know what the longest standing bylaw issues are so we know whether we have to hire more staff, because often we only get this information when we're debating the budget, and by then it's too late. So these are kind of stuff that I'd like to see going. Number of building permits is the other thing I would definitely like to look at. Operating budget statements, those are the councillors that are in Milton Public Library are familiar with that, because Milton Public Library is very good about sharing it every month. But we don't get the same kind of stuff in the council just because we probably haven't asked for it. And so on. So all the reports you see, I'm not necessarily, and I'm sure Councillor Challenor is not necessarily suggesting that we get all 21 different reports. That's just a sample of what we're thinking. There might be additional reports, there might be fewer ones. I think the right thing to do is how we're doing it. We're asking staff to take a look at it and come back and tell us what can be provided. And once staff comes back with that list, I might have amendment to add some stuff to it. Thank you.
Okay, Madam Clerk is suggesting that we deal with this today. Now, Madam Clerk, I know on the notice of motion that was circulated to us, it was moved by Councillor Hamid and Councillor Chalner, but on the official resolution, I see it's Councillor Hamid and Councillor Ali. So it should be Councillor Chalner then instead of Councillor Ali. Okay, with that correction, I know Councillor Ali, I don't know how your name got on here, but it did. So that'll be changed to Councillor Chalner. Councillor Chalner on this issue.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, Councillor Ali and I have very similar signatures, so I can see how that could happen. Anyway, with respect to this matter, and Z deserves credit for getting this where it is today. Some of these questions are questions I've had for a while, and I just sort of noticed, Your Worship, when I came back, some of the information that I had received my first time around, I wasn't seeing my second time around, and it's all, quite frankly, valuable in terms of, as Z said, the decision-making process. And it's not just valuable to us as council, it's also valuable to staff. And I would encourage my fellow members of council between today and when this comes back to think about the kind of reports they would like to see. Because, Z and I have our view of the world, but you may have your own view in terms of the kind of information that would help you make better decisions. And quite frankly, staff is also going to look at that from their perspective. So I hope that, by October, we've got a set of reports that are available to us that don't necessarily, overburden the corporation, but allow us to make better, more timely decisions. That's the bottom line.
Your worship, if we could just get you unmuted as well. We couldn't hear what you just said.
Okay, we're good to go, Councillor Clutt. Thanks very much, Nina, for directing that traffic. It's really appreciated.
We finally found one way to mute the mayor. Quick question for staff on this one. I know we're getting to the end of our wonderful day and we all want to go out and take advantage of the great weather. And I honestly thought we were going to be dealing with this next meeting too. In the therefore be it resolved section where it talks about coming back no later than October, is that giving you and staff enough runway to come up with this list? I know that this was going to be, and the CAO can talk about, this was already part of what was happening in the work plan, but is October enough runway for you and staff to get all of these things prepared?
Andrew?
Thank you for your question through you, Mr. Mayor. It's something we've been planning on doing and looking at the reporting structure, how we're putting together our reports, looking at a dashboard type format, if you will. By October, we should have a pretty good idea in place about how we would go about to do it, and then the information would flow after that. So yeah, it's not something we weren't expecting. I do appreciate Councillor Hamid's question, is that we would try to work it within existing resources, not try to produce anything new, but just be repackaging data that's available to us at this point.
No, that's great. I just, again, when it comes to October, I know that we're going through COVID-19 situation as well. So, and staff resources are obviously directed somewhere else, and just want to make sure that we have enough runway for you to provide these reports. So thanks very much, Andrew. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Now, Megan, getting back to you just on the timing issue that Councillor Clutt raised.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to provide clarity, particularly with regard to our previous conversation with respect to waiving the rules, because this notice of motion put forward is only requesting a staff report rather than a decision of council at this point. That's in accordance with our procedure bylaw. We can deal with it all at one meeting. I just wanted to provide that clarification.
That clarifies that. Okay, I do not have any. Councillor Di Lorenzo.
I had a brief question. I'm not sure it's for staff or Councillor Hamid. Under the monthly report, the one under any Ombudsman Integrity Commission complaints currently under investigation, I would like that information, but I'd also like, what's the definition of under investigation? Because I believe the Integrity Commissioner, when he or she gets a complaint, he does an initial investigation analysis to determine if the complaint should be further investigated, and he or she makes that decision. And so sometimes there's a complaint against a councillor and the councillor is never even made aware of it because the Integrity Commissioner reviewed the initial complaint and already determined it doesn't need further investigation. So like, is under investigation meaning it's past sort of the first, I don't know what you call it, analysis or investigation and needs to be further, or is it just any complaint at all needs to be reported to council, regardless if the Integrity Commissioner determines it needs to be further investigated or not?
Councillor Hamid, that is directed to you and your thought process in that regard, and then I'll go to the clerk for her interpretation as to what's evolved. Councillor Hamid.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, that's the kind of stuff that I'm looking at staff when they're coming back in October with a list of reports. I think staff is in a better position of answering the type of questions. Personally, my preference is to have as much information as possible, but I don't know what the rules are due to privacy reasons or some other reasons. It's possible that it's not appropriate to share things that are not actually going to be investigated. So I don't know. My preference is to get all information, including any complaints filed, even if that complaint is not investigated because it's not deemed worthy of that bar. But I will leave it to staff to say.
Okay, well, we'll leave it at that, and that's exactly what will happen. But Councillor Di Lorenzo, you had the floor.
Thank you. I'll leave it to staff as well. I'll wait to hear back their opinion on it. Thank you.
Okay, is there anything further on this item? Again, it's been moved by Councillor Hamid and Councillor Chandler. Again, it's fairly lengthy, and again with an appendix on it as well. Just before I call the vote on it, as you would suspect, the CEO and I, we chat about worldly affairs, including this one here, when I get an agenda. And of course, I suggested to him that I was certainly in support of what was being advocated, but I also made it known that I didn't want him or anybody else coming back to suggest to me, because of what we're advocating, to hire another 2 or 3 people, in as many words, believe it or not. And he assured me that that was not going to happen, because I know sometimes when we ask for something, you're not aware of the cost of it, even though there will be, you know, a little further work that will be needed. But our CEO has assured me that that's not going to happen. So I was looking for a little comfort level, and I got it from him because of this resolution that I suspect is going to pass, because I know I certainly support it. But with that little editorial on it, my colleagues should be aware of where I'm coming from on it. So nothing wrong with information, you know, and this really provides that type of information, as already alluded to. So with that, I will assume that everyone is in favor of this motion, including me, unless I see a hand go up otherwise. And it's carried. Next on our agenda is a resolution moved by Councillor Best and seconded by Councillor Ali, and be it resolved that bylaws numbers 033/2020 through and including 040-2020 be read, passed, and numbered, and that the mayor and the town clerk be authorized to sign the said bylaws, seal them with the seal of the corporation, and that they be engrossed in the bylaw book. Are there any questions on the reading of any of these bylaws? Again, unless I see a hand go up, I will assume that they're all carried. They're carried. Regional Council update. Any one of my regional colleagues, anything that they wish to add at this point with regards to regional update? Councillor Malboof, Best, Hamid, Clout, any one of you gentlemen? I know I have nothing to add. There was just a recent regional council meeting held Wednesday past, and again, the second virtual council meeting, and at least in my opinion, I thought it went reasonably well. Nothing, at least in my opinion, was earth-shattering. So with that, I know that you'll see on our agenda that's there is a confidential session. At least in my opinion, it's not necessary to go into closed session unless there was any member of council that wished to do that. And I know I've already checked with staff, and staff don't necessarily need to go into camera. So I'm not seeing anybody saying I want to go into camera. I have a resolution moved by Councillor Best and seconded by Councillor Ali, and be it resolved that Paul Hubabid be appointed to the Milton Public Library Board for the term commencing immediately and expiring with a current term of council or until a successor is appointed, and that Anthony Castellino be appointed if a vacancy occurs. That, members of council, is the resolution. Now that will be an open session that it'll become public. Questions or comments on this resolution? Being none, those in favor of the motion. Again, I'm going to assume that I'm still getting carried away here. So I don't see any hands going up there, so probably getting late. Councillor Tesser Dirksen has an announcement at the end of the meeting, and we'll get to that. So thanks to my clerk for keeping me on schedule here. So that's carried. So as I refer to it under new, used, or other business, Councillor Tesser Dirksen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I don't know if this would be considered a member statement like we were discussing before, but I promise I will not overstep or abuse what you've given me here. Many of my colleagues will know that I'm on the board of the Milton Chamber of Commerce. And I just want to acknowledge they've been doing some really excellent work throughout this pandemic, kind of keeping people connected. Two things I want to mention. They went ahead and did their virtual community awards gala online, and some familiar names were honored with some awards. Laurie McNabb, Volunteer of the Year. Townsend Smith was recognized as the not-for-profit of the year, and then Lauren Newton as Entrepreneur of the Year over at the Kind Matter Company, and then Cam Binney at McDonald's, Business Person of the Year, and then we had Granite Ridge, Geomorphics Limited, and CIE Property Management as Businesses of the Year. So congratulations to them. And the Chamber is hoping to move ahead with the live gala. It's such a great event that many of us attend each year. And they do have a date of, right now, I believe it's September 18th, but I guess that depends how things proceed with the uncertainty in the world right now. And also the Milton Farmers Market had its first COVID opening, I guess, during COVID at the Country Heritage Park. And I want to also acknowledge Country Heritage Park for actually donating the space free of charge so that the market could set up. We had 23 vendors. Councillor Best and I were on traffic duty out in the sun, so we got a good tan and got some steps in as well. But overall, it was successful. The Ministry of Health, 2 health inspectors showed up. They were happy with the measures that were taken. Everyone's very respectful of physical distancing, lots of sanitation and masks being worn. So for those who might have been a little bit apprehensive about attending, maybe it's worth taking another look at this point. And that's all I have to say for my member statement announcement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tesser Dirksen. Is there any one of my colleagues anything further to add? I'm just going to pick up on what Councillor Tesser Dirksen had mentioned. I want to thank my colleagues that did attend the farmers market at Heritage Park. I understand it went reasonably well, and I've had conversation with 2 or 3 of you on that. And mention was made earlier on the task force, the economic recovery task force, which will be happening at 9 or 9:30 tomorrow morning. And the Chamber of Commerce is going to be front and center of a lot of that with the coordination of many businesses. And Andrew, I don't know exactly how many people. I know there's a fairly good list of businesses going to be involved on that. So I think the public should be aware that we take this very serious with regards to our businesses in this community. So with that, Councillor Tesser Dirksen, thanks for just raising that. And Andrew, you might just want to comment on that because it's going to be critical. Andrew heard me say many weeks ago that the health issue is a major concern as it affects our country and the nation and globally. But he also heard me say the bigger concern of mine was going to be the economic recovery, which I was quite serious about then and am now. So Andrew, just on that, from where you sit and understand the recovery as it affects not only Milton, but Halton and this great nation of ours.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'm actually quite proud of that group. That's a group called the Mayor's Business Leadership Roundtable. It's a group we brought together 13 years ago to talk to the private sector about just getting some advice about how we would do business. We vet things through them to get a little bit of feedback, to the mayor and to staff. And that group's been in place for almost 13 years now. And so when it came time to need an economic recovery group, we just built it around that group. And we invited our economic development advisory chair, which is this term round, Councillor Cluett. He is joining that group with us. We supplemented it with a few other members. We didn't actually have a banking representative at the table. And so at Councillor Challoner's suggestion, we supplemented it with a banking representative. And we think we've got about 20 people to attend that meeting, which gives us a pretty good breadth of people to talk about economic recovery, including some smaller businesses, many of Milton's largest businesses, a banking presence. Both our MP and our MPP will be there, the Chamber of Commerce. So it's a pretty good group, and we look forward to getting together with them at 9:30 in the morning.
Andrew, thank you very much. And again, members of council.
Sorry, Your Worship, Megan, we just had to unmute you. We couldn't hear that.
Oh, Nina just mentioned that I was muted there, so I just want to thank Andrew for that, and we'll keep you posted as to what suggestions that business community in the chamber has. So with that, members of council, I'm not sure if anyone has anything further. I'm not seeing any hands go up. Madam Clerk, have I or we forgotten anything? Members of council, this council meeting of May 25th is now adjourned. To staff and council, thank you very much. Enjoy and be safe.
Good night.
Stopping the